For all its beauty and splendor, the sea can be a cruel teacher. To be stranded at sea is to be alone in a place that has no pity. There is water in every direction, but none of it can save you. The sun rises and burns you. At night the cold comes, the wind keeps moving, the waves lift you and drop you and carry you farther from anything you know. At first you believe someone will come. You watch the horizon. You search for smoke, sails, lights, or the silver flash of an aircraft. You listen for engines. Every cloud looks like land, every dark shape becomes a ship until it is not. Then the days pass. Your lips split. Your skin burns and peels. Salt enters the cuts. Your tongue grows thick from thirst. You become weak. You know the water beneath you will kill you if you drink it, but it is there, cool and endless, and this is a cruel thing. Then come the things beneath the surface. Sharks may circle. Jellyfish may drift nearby. A storm can overturn whatever fragile shelter is keeping you alive. Waves can tear away supplies, separate survivors, or pull an exhausted person into the darkness. Hallucinations can make distant clouds look like land, or make a person believe they hear voices where there are none. Hope does not always leave at once. It goes slowly. You stop looking at the horizon, stop saving water, stop repairing the raft, stop raising your arms when a plane passes far away. You tell yourself it does not matter. That is when death comes close. The following stories chronicle the despair that comes when stranded at sea. Some live, some die, but all face a horrible situation. Out there, hope is not a comforting thought. It is equipment, and sometimes it is the last piece of equipment you have left. Let's venture back to the unforgiving ocean where survival is earned, not given. This is Outdoor Disasters. Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai is a submarine volcano in the Kermadec Tonga Ridge in the South Pacific, a ridge formed by the convergent boundary where the Pacific Plate is subducted by the Indo-Australian Plate, forming a long volcanic and island chain. Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai volcano lies almost completely underwater, with the exception of two small volcanic islands nearby. In December 2021, the volcano awoke in a series of tantrums that turned into outright turmoil on January 15, 2022. The peak unleashed a blast so loud it was heard in Alaska, some 6,000 miles away. At approximately 7 p.m., a wave of over 20 feet high hit the shore of the small Tongan island of Atata. This was the result of the eruption underwater off the coast. The force of the eruption was more than 500 times that of the Hiroshima bomb dropped in World War II. For Lisala Folau, the will to survive would be one of the greatest stories ever told. Early in the morning, the volcano produced a colossal explosion that triggered a 7.4 magnitude earthquake. A shock wave radiated outward at close to the speed of sound, eventually traveling halfway around the world, and is listed as the loudest sound ever recorded. A tsunami quickly followed that hit Tongatapu, the main island in Tonga, and home to the capital Nuku'alofa. Communications were knocked out as the streets began to flood, and people fled for their lives. Lisala Folau lived on the small island of Atata, which is about 5 miles northwest of Tonga's capital. When I heard the loud bangs, I went outside my house. I thought it was thunder at first, but then I heard people chattering about getting to higher ground, Folau said. Atata boasts just one village, with a population of about 70 people. The island's interior consists of high cliffs, which can provide protection against the tsunami. Not long after the eruption Saturday night, Mr. Folau's older brother managed to alert him that a tsunami wave was coming. At this time, Folau was painting in his house. Formerly a carpenter, Folau was disabled, causing both his legs to not properly function. "I believe a baby can walk faster than I," Lisala stated. With a nephew, Lisala's brother helped him climb a tree. As waves crashed through the house, the Folau brothers and Lisala's niece Elisiva and nephew were in a tree and survived the first wave. During a lull in the waves, Lisala's brother told him and Elisiva to stay on the tree while he and his nephew sought help from the houses on higher grounds and to find some youth to help him to that area. Unbeknownst to the impending danger, his niece jumped down from the tree and attempted to get help as well and followed them. When she arrived, the nephew was tasked to assist an elderly woman while she was tasked to go back and assist Lisala to higher ground. It was a hard task for Elisiva, as it was getting cold and Lisala could barely move. At this time, it was around 7 p.m. Lisala's older brother was running, yelling to them that a big wave was coming. As Lisala turned and looked at the wave, it was a bigger wave than the previous 20-foot wave. When the wave broke on land just below us, my niece Elisiva and I had nothing to hold on to, and we were swept out to sea, Lisala stated. Out into the dark, the pair floated out to sea, calling out to each other. But it was dark, and neither was visible. He eventually couldn't hear his niece, though he did hear his son calling for him from shore. The truth is, no son can abandon his father, Folau said. But for me, as a father, I kept my silence, for if I answered him, he would have jumped in and tried to rescue me. But I understand the tough situation, and I thought if the worst comes, it only comes to me. He continued floating, being bashed by large waves. His mindset was to grab onto a tree or anything that could help him survive, and he found one. This tree was Lisala's lifeline for the night in the open ocean. Folau spent the entire night struggling to stay afloat. If there was any silver lining from this devastating eruption, volcanic ash rain heated the ocean significantly, keeping him warm. He felt ash falling and his hair was full of ash and rocks. Staying afloat was the biggest ordeal, and Lisala was struggling. But his will to live distracted any feeling of thirst or exhaustion. Lisala wanted to live and find his family. The current carried Lisala to a tiny atoll called Tokatok, an uninhabited island around 7 a.m. Sunday morning. This island was less than 3 acres. It was almost bare. The tsunami stripped away most of the trees. He saw a police patrol boat heading to Atata, prompting him to grab a rag and wave toward it. He remained unseen. He was beside himself, not knowing what happened to his family. This gave him a burst of energy and decided to swim to the island of Poloa. He began his swim, back into the ocean at about 10 a.m. Miraculously, Lisala made the 8-hour, 4-mile swim to the island. When he made it ashore, called and yelled for help, but there was no one there. This was another uninhabited island. He was worried about his niece at this time and looked frantically for any sign of her. He felt another burst of energy as his concerns went to his sister with diabetes and his youngest daughter who has heart problems. Most would stay put and wait in hope for rescue. In a survival situation of this nature, this would be the correct and best decision to stay alive. But Lisala wasn't worried about the danger he is going to put himself in. He made the decision to swim to Sopu, on the western edge of Nuku'alofa, on the main island of Tongatapu, a 1.5-mile swim. All these thoughts were racing in my mind, and what was the point now? I have survived, but what about them? He said. This drove me to get to Sopu. So back in the ocean, Lisala Folau went for a grueling swim, fueled by love, grief, and the will to survive and see his family again. At about 9 p.m., after more than 5 miles of swimming in the open ocean, Lisala Folau, the 57-year-old disabled grandfather, made it to the main island. An incredible feat an Olympic swimmer would struggle with. He swam ashore on a beach near a home in Sopu. He later found a piece of timber he used as a walking stick, eventually flagging down a vehicle and explaining that he was washed away from Atata and was trying to contact his family. The driver of the vehicle took Folau to his village and told them who he was. The people of the village were stunned. Later on, Folau arrived at a relative's home on Tongatapu, where his evacuated family was staying. They were overjoyed to see him alive. They were planning his funeral and had told his wife, who was in Australia at the time he was dead. My family stayed up all night singing hymns because I had miraculously survived, Lisala stated. When the story of Lisala Folau reached the news, his incredible story captivated people the world over. His story went viral on social media, hailing him as a real-life Aquaman. Lisala would later give an interview to recount the miraculous survival story. The scariest part to me during the ordeal was when the waves took me from land into the sea, he said. What came into my mind when I was helpless at sea were 2 things. One is that I still had faith in God. 2 is my family. I thought about my family and what they were thinking. They probably assumed I was dead. I have faith in my God, and I left everything to the will of God and His plans for me. And if He wants me to live to see my family, it is up to Him. I give praise and glory to God because He gave me the opportunity to see my family again. The people of Atata were relocated and resettled to the main island of Tongatapu, as their island was devastated by tsunami waves caused by the eruption and remained vulnerable to future tsunamis and cyclones. Unfortunately, there's not much information on the death toll on Atata, or if all of Lisala's family survived. The settlement for the Atata people opened on December 20th, 2022. Many of the people of Atata lived a simple subsistence lifestyle, reliant on their renowned fishing skills. But now, they must adapt to a new life on the main island. This adjustment has been challenging for some. "I really want to go back," Lisala Folau said. "But I know it's a foolish thing to do because I would be putting myself and my family at risk." For Larry Kaiser, his kayaking adventure would be a nightmare. At 3:45 p.m. in November 1995, Saul Canderas gets ready on the shore for a kayak outing alongside his close friend and former teammate, Larry Kaiser. Although it's past the usual sea kayaking season, endurance athlete Saul Canderas is determined to explore the renowned kayaking spot, the San Juan Islands. While both Saul and Larry Kaiser are regular weekend adventurers, this is their first time kayaking together. They plan to visit Strawberry Island and then head to a clothing-optional resort in Doe Bay, aiming to unwind in a hot tub. Larry's late arrival, about 4 hours behind schedule, visibly agitates Saul. Despite their friendship, their relationship is defined by fierce competition. Larry expresses his readiness for any physical challenge thrown by Saul, seeing it as a chance to outdo his friend. "I'm up for any kind of challenge like that, any kind of physical challenge, especially if Saul throws that at me. If he can do it, I can do it, and not only if he can do it, but I can do it better," Larry expressed. "Competitive would probably be a defining and describing characteristic of our friendship. We tended to compete in almost anything," Saul said. The two embark on their adventure at night, a risky decision even for experienced kayakers, particularly during winter. Unfamiliar with kayaking, Larry feels uneasy about venturing into the open sea in the dark. Setting out at night, people die every year kayaking in the San Juans, but that danger is exciting, it's a thrill. "I'm thinking I'm invincible," Larry stated. Paddling off the coast of Anacortes, Washington into the San Juan Islands, they navigate the perilous Rosario Strait towards their first destination, Strawberry Island. They are pressed for time, knowing they must cross swiftly before the tide turns against them. However, during their journey, Larry struggles to maneuver the kayak and grapples with the mechanics, failing to adjust the foot pedals before setting off. "I'm just kind of trying to fake it. And that's the first time I'd set my ass in a kayak. I'd never been in one before," Larry proclaimed. Saul realizes Larry's lack of experience and becomes anxious about the daunting trip with a novice paddler. As they brave treacherous waters in the darkness, the kayak trip seems to be heading towards disaster. Eventually, Larry and Saul arrive at Strawberry Island, but they're behind schedule. The only available landing spot is a sandy beach surrounded by hazardous rocks. As darkness envelops them, they encounter the fierce tidal currents swirling around the island, earning the area its ominous nickname, the Witch's Cauldron. Saul, the seasoned kayaker, formulates a plan to navigate through sharp rocks, using his headlamp to signal Larry to paddle in its direction. Amidst the darkness and crashing waves, Larry feels terrified. "Aim for the flashlight and paddle hard," Saul urges. Saul desperately maneuvers towards the shore, grappling with the rocks and the perilous waves. However, as Canderas progresses, he collides with the rocks. Larry tries desperately to warn Kaiser against approaching him, but amidst the cacophony of the crashing sea, Saul's headlamp is the only thing Larry can see, failing to make out Larry's cautionary message. Larry, spotting Saul's headlamps, steers towards him and crashes his boat into Saul's, resulting in both flipping into the water. Stranded, the duo manages to reach the land, but their kayaks remain in the water. Fortunately, their kayaks wash ashore, enabling them to salvage their belongings. Sadly, Larry hadn't properly sealed his dry bag, and its contents, made of cotton, were soaked and rendered unusable by the storm. As the tempest outside soaked them, a sense of demoralization lingered between the friends. By that point, I truly realized my assumptions were not correct on his level of preparedness. I'm the guide on the trip, and Larry was more or less along for the trip. If I got in trouble, he wouldn't be able to help me because he was so far out of his element, Canderas expressed. Larry and Saul's planned 9-day adventure hits a snag as the weather worsens, and Larry's gear remains soaked. Realizing the challenge ahead isn't feasible for both of them, Saul makes a call. I've rapidly realized the trip I planned isn't within our reach, not for the two of us together. It's not going to work. It just wouldn't be a prudent thing to do, Saul expressed. Frustrated, Saul cancels the trip, deciding it's time to paddle back to their vehicles. He outlines a few options. One was seeking help from a nearby island, another was stashing the boats at Orcas Island and taking the ferry home, and the third, toughest choice, was to paddle 3 miles back across the Rosario Strait. Wanting Larry to decide, Saul presented the options, and in their typical competitive manner, Larry chose option 3. What won out in the very end is the same thing that got us in trouble here. It's the same thing that's got us in trouble in other times. It's our competitive nature. If he can paddle across the channel, I can paddle across the channel. When we get together, maybe we don't make the best decisions as a team, Larry admitted. Unaware of the impending storm, they head into danger. Soon, they're faced with severe gusts and a massive storm swell. The conditions turn perilous, and they'll face worse without swift movement. As they paddle, Kaiser's kayak takes on water due to his unfamiliarity with paddling techniques. "Do you understand anything I'm saying, Saul? Stabilizing strokes do you no good," Saul shouted. Larry confessed he'd never been in a kayak before. Canderas tried to guide him, but their progress slowed in the channel, aggravated by wind and waves pushing them off course. Tensions rise as Kaiser's boat starts to sink. Saul realizes the danger they're in and makes a tough choice. "I figured that it was a good possibility that we could get killed. I was starting to have these doubts in my mind that we were going to be able to stick together. Your loyalty is to your friends, but then your first loyalty is to yourself. You're slowly getting to this decision. It's not an easy decision to get to. The key for my survival and even his survival was that I make it to shore and get help." As Saul heads for help, Larry calls out, but Saul is resolute in reaching land. To Kaiser, it felt like abandonment. "I can't see Saul anymore. He's gone. He's just not there. You don't leave your buddies, you don't leave your friends behind. I love the guy, but he left me." Saul presses on vigorously toward land, finally reaching the shore. He rushes to a phone and contacts authorities, alerting them that his friend is stranded in the Rosario Strait. Meanwhile, Larry struggles to paddle to safety when a large wave topples his boat. While Larry Kaiser isn't flipped upside down, he finds himself treading water at the mercy of the current, drifting into the open ocean. I'm getting scared at that time. Each minute is it's like some critical mass building and building and building, and it's not getting any better. It continues to get worse. It's getting dark, and there's no one here to not only save me or rescue me, but no one knows where the hell I'm even at. I'm starting to have some self-doubt, Kaiser expressed. Larry manages to cling to the boat and spots land not too far ahead. Unaware that swimming against the current would be futile, he decides to leave the boat behind, relying on his dry suit and athleticism. However, battling the forces of Mother Nature proved more challenging than he had anticipated. A full hour has passed since Larry's boat capsized, and a large-scale rescue operation is underway, but Larry remains nearly invisible without the lights or flares from his kayak, having forgotten the flashlight taped to the bow. Back ashore, Saul Canderas is overwhelmed with worry, contemplating whether leaving Larry behind was a mistake. "I was thinking, okay, I know me, I know Larry. If there are people that can survive for a long period of time just by being stubborn and being fit enough, we fit that description," he reflected. Several miles away, a search team locates a red kayak on an island, sparking hope in Saul's heart, believing Larry has reached safety. He contacts Larry's parents to assure them he's safe, unaware that Larry is still swimming in the darkness, being pulled farther into the Pacific. As time passes and the SR teams realize the boat has drifted unmanned to the island, Saul's hope diminishes. "At this point, I'm really going, man. We're in trouble. I really screwed up. He's dead. We're gonna find the body." You realize that somebody that you're fairly close to is no longer here, and you're the one that killed him. Just an incredible sense of no hope again. Why did I invite him on this trip without making sure that we were both ready for this trip? It's almost like saying, "What the hell was I thinking?" he agonized. Saul makes the painful call back to the Kaisers, admitting it's the most challenging call he's ever had to make. The Coast Guard suspends the search for the night, anticipating they'll be looking for Larry's body come morning. Meanwhile, adrift at sea, Larry Kaiser spots a buoy and tries to swim toward it, but the strong current carries him past it. With hope dwindling, he senses the imminent threat of death. Exhausted and with a plummeting body temperature, Larry knows his life hangs in the balance. He contemplates ending it all. I really thought just end it. Now, why even bother with this? I thought about, trying to essentially drown myself. You think about weird stuff like that, and that's when they start thinking about my mom, and I love my parents, I love my dad, I love my family. What do you say? I was ready to die. It's not an issue. I didn't want them to feel that suffering and pain and not know what happened to me, he expressed. As Larry continues drifting, he notices a lighthouse ahead, drifting toward it with the current's help. Luckily, a side current brings him close to the last piece of land before being swept into the Pacific Ocean. Reinvigorated with hope, Larry musters all his remaining strength to reach the island. It's getting closer and closer. I'm like, I'm gonna make this, my God. Thank you. Thank you, Lord. I come up on the shore, and there's this big rock right there. And I just swim up and put my arms around this rock. This is the most beautiful rock I've seen in my life. That's all I could think of. No one else, nothing else, just lie there and enjoy this rock, this stupid rock that was my buddy, Larry recounted. Having survived 9 hours in the freezing ocean, Larry Kayaker now faces a desperate battle to keep warm on land, cold, and in darkness, uncertain of his location. Reflecting, he pondered, I thought about what the hell is Saul doing right now? What's he thinking right now? What is this man thinking? Is he thinking that I'm dead? Is he thinking he killed me? Is he thinking he's responsible for killing me? The big difference between him and I is there's just not a chance in hell I would leave someone like that. I wouldn't do that no matter what happens. If the person I'm with is going to die, I will die with them. Upon waking up, Larry presumes he's on the mainland, hoping to reach the lighthouse he spotted the previous night for help. However, his hope turns to horror when he realizes the lighthouse he saw belonged to another stretch of land, leaving him stranded on a different island with the lighthouse across another strait. To make it there, he faces another mile of freezing water, dehydrated and hypothermic, at the mercy of dangerous currents. As he swims, he abruptly halts and glances back to find a search helicopter hovering where he stood just an hour before. "You gotta be kidding me," he exclaimed. Meanwhile, back on shore, Kinderis, still in kayak gear, paces anxiously, troubled about Larry and reflecting on the decisions made that day. Over time, finding Larry, I became increasingly uncertain if I made the right call. Not only did you get your friend killed, but it's proof you're a failure, he confessed. But, amidst these thoughts, Kayaker astonishingly reaches the island with the lighthouse after swimming a mile. Unfortunately, it turns out to be an uninhabited lighthouse, and hope dwindles. As Larry rests by the lighthouse's entrance, a helicopter spots him, finally marking the end of his day-long ordeal at sea. Simultaneously, Saul receives news of his friend's rescue and rushes to the hospital. Upon Saul's arrival at the hospital, he finds Larry undergoing treatment. "Hey Larry, you okay?" "I guess so. You left me," Larry expressed, his tone stern. "I'm just glad you're okay," Saul responded. The tension dissolved into a grin and laughter shared between the two friends. With who I am, I wanted him not to feel guilty. I wanted him to hopefully be relieved in the fact that I'm okay. Do I hold a grudge against him for doing that? No, I don't. Despite their ordeal, Saul and Larry maintain their friendship and have even explored kayaking together in the San Juans. However, they never broached the subject of what occurred, nor can they find common ground on whether Saul's decision to leave his friend behind was justified. For Walter Wyatt, his flight would be a living nightmare. Walter Wyatt was 37 years old, a man who had seen the war and lived to talk about it, though he rarely did. He had flown jets in Vietnam, and now he flew quieter things, private planes and commercial routes, out of Homestead, Florida. That December in 1986, he had taken a break from it all, crossing over to the Bahamas for some sun, some gambling, and a little something to take the weight off his shoulders. It was December 5th, 1986. He had 2 young children in Tennessee who still called him Dad, even if he wasn't always there to answer. And he'd been told the weather would be clear. A simple flight, Nassau to Miami. He'd done it before. 65 minutes of engine hum and empty horizon. But the thieves had come in the night, gutting the plane like a fish. Gone was the navigation gear. All that remained was a compass and an old handheld radio that barked static more than signal. Still, he climbed into the cockpit and turned toward home. What should have been a short flight to Miami was about to turn into a fight for survival. Walter Wyatt was alone in the cockpit of his twin-engine Beechcraft. No co-pilot, no GPS, no functioning navigation system. He was flying by instinct and hope. An hour in, the skies turned violent. Storm clouds closed in. Rain lashed the cockpit windows like bullets. Somewhere past Andros Island, the compass began to spin, wild and useless. Wyatt dropped below the clouds, desperately scanning the sea. He thought he spotted the rocks near Bimini. He turned north. But Bimini wasn't there. Nothing was. Just endless water. And now, he was lost. In the midst of the storm, he called for help. "Mayday, mayday," he crackled into the radio. A passing Air Jamaica flight heard him, relaying his cries to the Coast Guard. A U.S. Air Force Falcon jet was dispatched immediately, but storms and confusion delayed their arrival, and the sun was going down. Wyatt's voice came through the static, desperate. "I'm running out of fuel." Then, through a break in the clouds, a flash of white and orange, the Falcon jet had found him. "We've got you, Walter. Just 6 miles. Hang in there, buddy," said Lieutenant Stephen Blankenship, signaling him toward K-Sal's emergency strip. But fate wasn't finished. The right engine sputtered and died. Then the left went cold. Wyatt gritted his teeth and lowered the flaps. "I'm going in," he shouted. From the Falcon above, the crew watched in stunned horror as the plane dipped toward the waves. Its lights skimmed the surface, then vanished. They circled. Again, nothing. No wreckage, no flare, no raft, no voice. The jet released a parachute flare that burned like a ghost over the churning sea. The Falcon jet circled low, slicing through the gloom in wide, desperate arcs. But there was nothing. No flicker of light from a life raft. No movement on the waves, no signal. Just darkness and the endless roar of the ocean below. Inside the Falcon, the silence grew heavy. Co-pilot Mike Flaherty tapped the fuel gauge. The needle was falling fast, too fast. They were running on fumes. At 6 p.m., with daylight fading and fuel nearly gone, Commander Blankenship made the call. He turned the Falcon's nose toward Key West, his voice flat with exhaustion. "We did everything we could. We'll refuel and come back," he muttered. But his eyes stayed locked on the sea as if willing Wyatt to rise from it. From his dangerously low altitude, Walter Wyatt had only seconds. There was no time to think, only to react. His twin-engine Beechcraft was dropping fast, caught in the grip of a storm. Fuel tanks dry, the ocean rising to meet him. Walter was a few hundred feet above the waves when everything gave out. The plane lurched one final time and fell into the ocean. His instincts took over. He gritted his teeth and braced for impact. The aircraft hit hard. The nose smashed into the sea, and his forehead slammed into the instrument panel with a sickening crack. Blood gushed down his face. His leg tore open on a jagged edge beneath the console. The plane skipped once, then slammed back into the ocean with brutal force. Salt water surged into the cockpit, but somehow, stunned, dazed, and bleeding, Wyatt was still breathing. He reached for whatever he could. 2 flares? A life vest? His will. Scrambling out onto the wing as the plane rocked beneath him, he fought the waves, trying to steady himself against the fury of the Atlantic. He looked up. Through the dark, through the storm, the white and orange lights of the Coast Guard Falcon cut across the sky, so close he could feel salvation just beyond his reach. He stood on the wing, waving both arms, screaming into the wind. The jet passed directly overhead, no more than 200 feet away, and kept flying. They hadn't seen him. Desperate, Wyatt fumbled with a flare. He struck the ignition cap. Nothing. The second one crumbled, ruined by seawater. The frustration swelled inside him, but it wasn't fear that took hold. It was rage. He had survived the crash, only to be invisible, powerless, forgotten. And now the plane beneath his feet was sinking. It didn't float long. Within seconds, the nose dipped, the fuselage groaned, and the entire aircraft slipped beneath the surface, swallowed by the dark water. Alone now, the sea began to take him. His vest was partially inflated, but the left chamber was softening, hissing out precious air from a tear at the seam. Then the inflation tube detached completely. Wyatt spat the salt from his mouth, clutched the collapsed chamber and blew air into the open hole, sealing it with his finger. He couldn't afford to sink. Not now. Waves rose around him, 5 feet high and growing. He knew the rules. He had taken sea survival training. Conserve energy, stay calm, stay visible. But the ocean was rough, and time was punishing. After 30 minutes, his muscles were cramping, the cold cutting deeper than before. Blood still streamed down his face and into the water, and with it came another kind of terror, the scent of blood drifting through the sea like a beacon to predators. But he pushed the thought away. There was no room for fear. Not out here, not now. Hidden in the troughs between waves, he knew how invisible he must look to searchers. He couldn't wait to be found, not in these conditions. So he began to swim toward where he believed K-Sal must be. The direction was a guess. Every wave looked like the last. Every shadow could have been the sky or a shape beneath the water. Squalls moved in again, violent, unrelenting. The wind howled across the surface, ripping warmth from his skin. The sun was long gone. The horizon vanished into black. His strength ebbed. His hope followed. Still, he fought the water, stroking weakly against the pull of the current. He prayed, not in desperation, but with conviction. If this were the day he would die, he told God, then let it be known he asked for forgiveness. He wasn't ready to go, but he was not afraid to face it. He only hoped he would be found before the sea took that choice away. Treading water in the pitch-black Atlantic, Walter Wyatt moved with quiet purpose. The waves rose and fell around him like breathing beasts, but he ignored the cold and the pain. His fingers worked methodically, tightening his life vest and preparing it to carry one final message. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was goodbye. He reached for the airline ID badge, still clipped to his shirt, a small piece of plastic that had now become his last will and testament. Using the edge of his watch band, he scraped across the surface, carving words through trembling hands and failing light. Trish, the house. That was all he could fit, but he hoped someone would understand. He was leaving his home in Homestead, Florida, for the woman he loved, Trisha Lansdale. On the other side, he scratched something more cryptic, a private code, one he'd used before, 1-4-3, I love you, and letters stood for the people who still anchored his heart, his family and Trisha. He was divorced and the kids lived with their mother in Chattanooga, but tonight, everyone he loved felt close. He fastened the badge to the vest with a piece of broken strap and kept swimming. The hours were slipping. He checked his watch. 8 p.m. He whispered to himself, I can make it to 10. And he believed it, because he had to. But just before that deadline, something touched him. Something solid. Something alive. He felt a bump against his foot, firm, fast, and gone just as quickly. His breath caught, his muscles locked. It was a shark. He didn't need to see it to know. His skin prickled, not from the cold this time, but from the primal knowledge that they were here now. They had found him, and they'd come back. Still, he didn't panic. He set another goal. Midnight, he thought. Make it to midnight. But survival was growing more complicated. The right chamber of his vest was leaking now, slowly deflating beneath him. When the inflation tube tore free, he didn't flinch. He leaned his head back, blew into the opening until the chamber puffed back to life, and jammed his other index finger into the hole to keep it sealed. One hand for survival. One hand to stay afloat. Exhausted, he rolled onto his back, letting the rain wash over him. His tongue was swollen from salt. His eyes burned. But for the first time in hours, the clouds broke above and the stars appeared, cold and spinning. He stared at them, blinking through the blur. One star seemed to drift away from the rest, darting across the heavens like a messenger. It moved toward him with eerie speed. Maybe it's coming to take me, he thought. Maybe that's the way I go. Then he whispered into the night, a plea carried on the wind. Please God, if you take my life, take it swiftly. High above the Atlantic, Lieutenant Stephen Blankenship wrestled the controls of his Falcon jet as it clawed its way through the storm-choked sky. He had refueled in Key West, burning to get back to the last known coordinates. A Navy helicopter flanked him, ready to light the sea with its powerful spotlight. But the weather had turned brutal. Visibility dropped to zero. The rain came in sheets. Thunder rolled across the horizon like cannon fire, and lightning flashed so close it lit the cockpit in blinding pulses. Continuing now would mean risking 2 crews and 2 aircraft in a blind, deadly gamble. Gritting his teeth, Blankenship signaled the chopper. They were turning back. The search would have to wait until morning. Meanwhile, down below, the storm hadn't let up. Walter Wyatt was still alive, but barely. Hours had passed. Time no longer felt real, only the rhythm of floating, gasping, and surviving. He imagined the sky at dawn filled with aircraft coming for him, engines humming, doors flung open, arms reaching down to pull him from the sea. He made a vow to himself as midnight crept past: survive until first light, just hold on. But the ocean wasn't finished testing him. Suddenly something slammed against his feet. Another shark. A hard blow, swift and certain. Panic surged through him. Instinctively he thrashed, kicking at the invisible shape below and yanking his hands away from the vest to strike. In that instant, water surged into the open holes of the life jacket. He felt the buoyancy vanish. And then, he sank. 5 feet down, into the darkness. Salt water flooded his eyes and mouth. The vest pulled him deeper, dragging him into the void. His lungs burned. But through the chaos, a voice inside him roared, "Stop! Get your head together." Now he forced his limbs to obey. Clawing through the water, he reached out, desperate. His fingers brushed rubber. He grabbed the vest, caught it before it sank too deep, and kicked hard for the surface. He broke through, coughing and spitting, the vest limp in his arms. He held it close, took one deep breath, then turned his face into the sea. Arms outstretched, he began to move, slow, steady, deliberate. A scissor kick, a breath, a glide, again. It was the only rhythm left in the world. For nearly an hour he floated and kicked, using the movement of the waves to carry him. When his mind finally calmed, he blew air back into the vest's chambers and slipped his body across it like a raft. The ocean was still angry, but he began to ride it, timing each swell. He wasn't fighting anymore, he was moving with it. And somewhere in that endless black sea, with only the stars above and blood still on his brow, Wyatt made another promise. "I'll make it to dawn." A flicker of hope sparked on the horizon, the faintest red glint as the sun tried to claw its way through the overcast sky. Walter Wyatt squinted against the glare, scanning the heavens for any sign of rescue. But there were no planes, no sound of rotors, no salvation. Just the endless ocean, cold and indifferent. Then the sea itself betrayed him. Out of nowhere, a dorsal fin sliced through a wave, dead ahead. A moment later, something slammed into his left elbow. He let out a sharp cry and twisted away just as a second shark, its skin the sickly yellow-gray of deep-water predators, brushed past him. They weren't curious anymore. They were testing him, sizing him up. The pack had arrived. Wyatt flipped onto his back, treading water as another shadow loomed inside the wall of a rising wave. It was a bull shark, thick, heavy, deliberate. It came straight at him, then vanished beneath the surface. He held his breath, waiting. Suddenly, it surged upward from below, jaws aimed at his legs. With a flash of instinct and adrenaline, Wyatt snapped his knee up and brought the heel of his sneaker down with all his strength, smashing it between the shark's eyes. The beast recoiled, vanished, then surfaced 20 feet away, circling now, slower, more cautious. Smaller fish, remoras, clung to its sides like parasites. Wyatt locked eyes with it, his voice rising from somewhere deep in his chest. "I'm not ready to die yet," he said through gritted teeth. "Not today." The ocean answered with more shadows. 2 more bull sharks came in fast, swirling past his frantic kicks. One brushed close, too close, but spun away. Then came a hammerhead, cutting through the water like a torpedo. Its approach was almost too fast to counter. Wyatt lashed out, missed the head, but his foot struck the dorsal fin with a jarring crunch. That was enough. The shark turned, disappearing into the depths. Then he saw it. A metallic blue tail flicked through the chop. The unmistakable sign of a mako. Fast, lethal. One of the fastest predators in the ocean, capable of 90-mile-an-hour strikes. Wyatt's breath hitched, his muscles tensed. The mako surged through a wave, its head rising above the water just long enough to reveal two lifeless black eyes, locked onto his. For one frozen moment, man and shark stared at each other, and then the mako was gone. Wyatt floated, every limb burning. He was drained, every kick costing more than the last. And he knew the truth the moment it settled into his gut. The sharks could sense it. The moment he stopped fighting, just once, the feeding frenzy would begin. Blood would call blood. He couldn't let it happen. Then, faint and distant, came a low roar. His head snapped left. There on the horizon, a Coast Guard jet appeared, slicing through the gray skies. He blinked, heart hammering as the aircraft banked and vanished behind a cloud. No, come back. Moments later, it reappeared, sweeping across the ocean in a methodical back-and-forth pattern. It was searching. He was still alive. The Coast Guard jet roared low, slicing through the damp morning sky. Walter Wyatt squinted into the rising sun, a half-mile of ocean separating him from salvation. His arms, numb and trembling, thrashed above the waves as he waved the orange life vest in wide arcs, praying they'd see him. The plane drew closer, and then, directly overhead, he arched his back, lifted himself halfway out of the water, and shouted into the void, "Why don't they see me?" Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Stephen Blankenship was scanning the surface, hunting for wreckage. His eyes flicked over the endless swells when something tugged at his brain. A flash of motion, too human to ignore. A man, half buried in the sea, waving for his life. Blankenship slammed a button on his console to lock the coordinates and called out, "There's a guy in the water!" He radioed the Coast Guard cutter Cape York, just 12 minutes out. From the co-pilot seat, Mike Flaherty dropped a smoke canister into the sea, a silver signal against the blue. He spotted Wyatt immediately, swimming toward the plume. But then something darker moved beneath the surface. A shadow, massive, tracking him. Flaherty's voice jumped an octave as he called over the radio. "Get moving, cutter! There's a shark targeting this guy." Wyatt had no idea. His eyes were locked on the drifting smoke, his arms slicing through the water, his heart pounding like a war drum. Why hadn't they dropped a life raft? The answer revealed itself moments later. A sleek white vessel was tearing across the waves toward him. Cape York, cutting through the sea like a blade. As the cutter neared, Wyatt felt a new dread. He wasn't safe yet. On deck, figures stood with rifles. His heart leapt into his throat. 15 hours of swimming had left his mind clouded and body wrecked. Confused and afraid, he began shouting, "I'm unarmed! I'm unarmed!" But the weapons weren't for him. The crew was scanning the water for sharks, ready to intervene if one made a final move. Sometimes, they explained later, a shark will rush in when a rescue boat closes in on a target. It's a last, savage strike. A rope ladder, Jacob's ladder, unfurled down the side of the cutter. Wyatt reached it and grasped the bottom rung, but didn't have the strength to climb. His body was done. Two sailors leaned over, grabbing him under the arms, hauling him up from the sea like wreckage. Someone shouted, "Throw the vest away!" But Wyatt shook his head weakly and croaked, "No way. It goes where I go." They dragged him over the rail. His eyes were swollen shut, his body shaking, his skin soaked in salt, sun, and blood. He dropped to his knees and kissed the steel deck. It was 9 a.m. He had been in the water for over 15 hours. Above, circling in the Falcon, Flaherty slapped Blankenship on the back. The commander smiled, wide and relieved. "This makes it all worthwhile," he said, watching the rescue unfold. Later that day, Wyatt was checked into a hospital in Key West. Exhausted but alive, he was reunited with his parents. He sat quietly for hours with Tricia, the woman he'd nearly died thinking of. Over and over, he whispered, "I can't believe I'm alive." That night, he finally slept. Tricia held his hand as he drifted off, and the life vest that had carried his last wishes lay beside him on the couch like a ghost. But survival had a cost. Even in the hospital, sleep was difficult. His body was broken, but his mind was worse. Something inside him had shifted during those long hours at sea. There's no doubt I had PTSD, but in 1986, no one knew what PTSD was, he later said. For a long time, Wyatt couldn't talk about what happened. The trauma lived just beneath the surface, waiting. He kept the life vest and the tattered remnants of his survival gear, his watch, the ID tag etched with his final messages, like relics from a war he barely survived. For a while, they served as daily reminders of the miracle that he was still breathing. But even miracles can become burdens. I kept it for a year or so, Wyatt admitted. Then I said, I've got to get rid of some of this stuff. It was like skeletons in the closet, because I've got to say, it was pretty horrifying. Eventually, he found ways to heal. He took up scuba diving, returned to flying, faced the sky that nearly took him. Time passed. He got stronger. Now, at 75, Wyatt lives far from the coast, running a property management and insurance company with his wife in the small town of Dozier, Alabama. His home in Florida was destroyed by Hurricane Andrew in 1992, another close call in a life already full of them. But he doesn't dwell on the horrors of that night anymore. He's moved forward. He survived. Wyatt stated, "This is about life. You can't give up. You're going to go through something bad in your life. If you don't, you're a very lucky person, but you can never quit." In October 2010, 3 teens from Tokelau would find out how dangerous and remote these waters can be. Etweni Nassau, 14, Samu Pelesa, 15, and Philo Philo, 15, drifted 300 kilometers across an empty and little-traveled section of the Pacific Ocean. It began, in the grand tradition of ill-considered ideas, with a group of boys and a bottle of booze. The boys were gathered in their clubhouse near the end of the only road in the only village on the Pacific island of Atafu. Atafu is one of 3 atolls that make up the nation of Tokelau. The total amount of land on Atafu is 1.4 square miles, population 524. The nearest atoll, equally tiny, is 57 miles to the south, well beyond the range of visibility. The closest significant landmass is Samoa, a 28-hour ferry ride away. There is no landing strip on Tokelau. There are also no dogs, prisons, lawyers, pavement, or soil. The land is mostly bits of broken coral. The highest elevation is 15 feet. Coconuts and fish are the traditional diet. From any point on Atafu's shoreline, nothing can be seen but water, all the way to the horizon. They were drinking vodka, smoking cigarettes, and telling stories. It was getting late. Then someone brought up the tale of the teenagers. 5 or 6 years previous, 3 teens had taken a boat without permission and broken one of the cardinal rules of Tokelauan society. They'd ventured into the open ocean without the escort of a tautai, a master fisherman. The ocean is an unpredictable and occasionally violent place, and the title of tautai, bestowed by the island's elders, is equivalent to a driver's license. Even tautais do not venture far offshore. The isolation of Atafu can at times be difficult to bear. Philo stated Atafu felt like a prison. The desire to escape can become overwhelming. And as a plastic jug of vodka was passed around, the old story soon morphed into a new idea. By the time the jug was finished, the idea had become a plan. And so, almost on a whim, when the plans became serious, when Samu announced he'd be willing to steal his uncle's new boat, and most everyone in the clubhouse began backpedaling from their bluster, Etweni spoke up. He said he was in. Philo, Samu, and Etweni fanned out across the village. Their first mission was to find gasoline, and they soon collected about 20 gallons in 5 plastic jerry cans. They stashed the stolen gas in Samu's uncle's boat, a silver-colored Froza, made in New Zealand, with a 15-horsepower Yamaha engine. There was nothing fancy about it. A couple of unpainted wooden benches, a tiny storage space in the bow that could keep a few things dry. The only items inside were a small machete and a wooden mallet used to club fish. Its freeboard, the distance between the water and the top of the boat's sides, was just 16 inches, enough to repel only the smallest of waves. The boat's best feature was not visible. Inside the hull were 3 large air-filled aluminum cylinders, pontoons that made the craft exceptionally stable. After loading the gas, the boys again separated, dashing the short distance from the dock to the village. Philo sneaked into his house and grabbed a green tarpaulin, a large plastic sack containing 20 coconuts, a white ceramic teacup, 2 packs of Pall Mall cigarettes, and another jug of vodka, still sealed. From his refrigerator, he took 2 bottles of milk and a Kraft mayonnaise jar filled with water. Samu, meanwhile, climbed a tree and knocked down 9 more coconuts. Etweni had been instructed to find fishing equipment, but he was concerned that he'd wake someone up and get caught. So there was no fishing gear. The boys boarded the boat. To steel their resolve, they opened the vodka, poured it in the teacup, added a bit of water, and passed it around. This time, Etweni joined in. Samu started the engine. It was the final chance to run home, to sleep in a bed. Etweni later admitted that as he sat in the boat, he'd thought that this was a dangerous and stupid idea. "I almost jumped off," he says. But then Philo began yelling, and Samu and Etweni joined in. A rebel yell, a primal scream, a howl that tried to both express and eclipses their nervous, excited joy. They soon began shouting people's names, those they'd stolen from. They teased Samu's uncle. "Ha ha, we're leaving, we stole your boat." And they motored through the gap in the reef surrounding Atafu. It was the first time any of the boys had been on the ocean side of Tokelau without a master fisherman. Their plan was to reach the next atoll. They figured it would take 3 or 4 days. They had only the clothes they wore, shorts and t-shirts and sandals. They continued drinking. Etweni was bartender, water and vodka, in their 1 teacup. Philo was the first to tire out. He curled up on the bottom of the boat. Samu and Etweni stayed up, still drinking. Somehow, in his insobriety, Etweni took off his shirt and lost it overboard. Samu controlled the engine. "We just had an idea of following 1 star, says Etweni. "But we didn't know what star it was." Then Samu too grew sleepy. So Etweni drove for a while. Eventually he switched off the engine. And soon all 3 boys were passed out on the flat metal bottom of the boat. Etweni woke first, to the noise of a couple of dozen seagulls flying around. He could no longer see land. The bright sun, he realized, eliminated the idea of following 1 star. Philo was next up. He immediately vomited over the side. Then Samu awoke and he too threw up. They began cracking coconuts, banging them against the rail of the boat, drinking the liquid and chucking them away. They didn't even bother scraping out the coconut meat. Then they finished both bottles of milk. They broke out the cigarettes. Only 6 were dry. They smoked them. They ran the engine intermittently. It was a warm and overcast day. Their new idea was to follow the seagulls. The birds would naturally head back to land. But the birds seemed to be flying randomly, maybe in big circles. As the afternoon wore on, they grew a little hungry. They wondered what people were saying about them back on Atafu. Eventually, the sun set. "We were still in a good mood," says Philo, "not that hungry." They slept again in a puddle on the bottom of the boat. The next day, they saw an airplane. It was flying low, and they figured it was looking for them. Etweni waved, and the other 2 boys immediately teased him for wanting to be rescued so soon, so he stopped waving. Philo and Samu didn't think 2 days was enough to seem heroic. They figured as the plane flew away that it would eventually be back. Back on Atafu, a town meeting was called to discuss the disappearance of the boys. The prevalent feeling was, "Oh no, not again." The island was still recovering from a tragedy 8 months earlier, in February of 2010, when 3 men on a barge were caught in a storm. Their boat capsized. The bodies washed ashore, and now 3 more were missing. The forecast was for stormy weather. Help was requested from the Royal New Zealand Air Force. It swiftly sent out a P-3 Orion military surveillance plane with radar capable of detecting something as tiny as a submarine periscope. The total search area was more than 8,500 square miles. The plane searched 3 separate times, returning once to Samoa to refuel, for a total of 8 hours. At this point, approaching the 3rd night with no idea where they were, their supplies pitifully meager. You might think that panic would have set in, but they had not. They were sure someone would soon rescue them. On the next day, they finished the mayonnaise container of water and continued drinking the coconuts. this time making sure to scrape the insides. By that evening, they had used up all the gas. They could now only drift with the current. They threw all the fuel containers overboard. When they went to sleep, they had exactly 11 coconuts left. Their sleep was fitful and wet. The wind picked up. Etweni, who'd lost his shirt the first night, was especially cold. In the morning, there was still nothing but water all around them. No rescue boat, no airplane. Etweni finally said it. "Shouldn't we be found by now?" The response from the others? "They laughed at me," Etweni says. Their mouths grew very dry. Despite storm forecasts, it had not rained at all during the trip, and the only edible items were coconuts. That day, they each drank and ate too, an extravagant use of their supplies, yet it wasn't nearly enough to slake their thirst or satiate their hunger. By the time they went to sleep that night, they had precisely 5 coconuts left. At sunrise on the 5th day, the day the teens who had previously stolen a boat had been rescued, the boys all finally admitted aloud that they'd like to go back, that they wished they were home. Day 6, the 3 were well aware that they'd made a terrible mistake. Soon they were down to their last coconut. Thirst was like a hand around their throats. "That's when we started thinking about drinking seawater," says Etweni. Philo warned them that this was a bad idea. The next morning, Samu, the lifelong Tokelauan, announced, "I'm drinking it," and dipped the teacup into the ocean. He started sipping. "Then I got sick of looking at Samu drinking it," says Etweni. "Me too," says Philo. They all drank seawater together. Finally, more than a week into the trip, it rained. And for the first time, the boys used the green tarp. They took it out and spread it open in order to catch rainwater. Samu, Philo, and Etweni saw plenty of fish. The shadow of the drifting dinghy created a kind of artificial reef that attracted many small fish, which in turn enticed larger ones. There were also the ever-circling birds, who dive for fish during the day and sleep bobbing on the water at night. All the food the boys needed was visible to them, yet just out of reach. For a while, Etweni tried fishing with his hand, just holding it in the water over the side of the boat. He says he actually felt fish, but could never grab them. Through sheer happenstance, the boys did actually catch a few fish. The chief disadvantage of the low-sided boat was that seawater continuously splashed in. A wave of any size would break over the gunnels. Bailing during the day, using the mayonnaise jar, was constant, and at night the boat slowly filled up. But every so often, a total of 4 times during the trip, the waves carried along a fish that would flop into the boat. All of their skin soon grew torturously itchy rashes. The boys have dark, latte-colored skin, but the sun still overwhelmed them, igniting severe burns. About 2 weeks in, they began bickering. By this point, the boys were starving. "It's like your stomach is being ripped apart," says Etweni. Of course they weren't in good moods. "We got angry easily," says Etweni. They had nothing to divert themselves. They lost track of how many days they'd been gone. The disk of the sun slowly traveled overhead. In rough weather, they rode the great ocean swells, rising and falling sometimes 30 feet or more as if the sea were breathing. The horizon was naked save for the incessant waves that formed a swaying divide between ocean and sky. Later on, a storm blew in. It rained for 2.5 days, the only major storm the boys encountered. They couldn't bail fast enough. Water rose to the benches. They shivered violently. Rain, even in the tropics, comes in cold, so they wrapped themselves under the tarp, sitting cross-legged. From outside the boat, they would have looked like a small green haystack. It was warm in there, so despite the boat filling up and in danger of sinking, they sat for an entire day, huddled naked, rain hammering down, thrashed by winds. They say they felt like a team at this moment, dependent on one another, helping one another, just the 3 of them, in a tiny boat, amid an endless sea. A few nights later, they spotted a ship. It was a large one, the deck outlined in orange lights. They hadn't seen a boat since leaving Tokelau. It was difficult to tell how far away it was. They thought, let's make a sail and catch up. So they held up the tarpaulin and tried to harness the wind. But it was exhausting work. So they debated whether to jump in the water and swim for it. Should only Samu go? Should they all go? They couldn't decide. And the boat motored away. They felt terrible. They wondered if that was their only chance, if they'd die before seeing another ship. They thought about all the food on that boat, the warmth, the beds. They blamed one another for not jumping in the water and at least making an active attempt at saving their lives. Now all they could do was sit in their dinghy and wait. Soon after the ship passed, Etweni quit. He stopped talking. He curled up in the bow. He didn't even sit up. He just lay all day in the bottom of the boat, mute, mostly unmoving, eyes half-lidded. He did this for weeks. Deep in his silent stage, pondering suicide, Etweni was alone, confined to the bow of the boat. One afternoon, a bird, one of the gray gulls that hung around the dinghy, landed on the boat. The boys were half comatose. They stared at the bird. A few days later, another bird came. It was just after a big rainstorm, and there was water in the tarp. This time, Samu tried to catch it. He was stealthy. He crouched low and grabbed the bird by the neck. They ate a bite of raw meat, but even in their hunger, it was worse than yuck. So they dried the carcass in the sun, and it was good. Afterwards, says Etweni, we wanted more. They drank the water in the tarp. The sea was so calm that waves didn't splash into the dinghy. Etweni ended his silence. The bird finally helped, he says, and I started talking. It was a good day. We were friends again, says Etweni. We were happy that day. But no more birds ever landed on the boat. The relief provided by those few bites of meat did not last long. It only served to reawaken their hunger pangs, their long dormant stomachs gurgling with digestive juices. But there was nothing more. Soon they were hungrier than ever. The sun continued to beat down, the sea stretched all around, limitless and cruel. At times, Samu and Philo spent a few minutes bobbing in the water to cool off, but Etweni felt too frail to leave the dinghy. During one of these dips, the boys found barnacles on the bottom of the boat. Samu was the first to eat them. They were better than not eating. They gave some to Etweni. Then, during one swim, Philo let go of the boat, trying to snap off a barnacle. The current was strong, and he drifted away. He was too weak to catch up, but Samu held the dinghy in one hand and swam with the other, tugging the boat. It was an incredible feat considering his condition. He managed to swim fast enough to reach Philo. He grabbed his hand. He helped haul him into the boat. That was the last time anyone went swimming. They were crazed with hunger, desperate beyond any measure. Their bodies were rotting before their eyes. Starvation lowered their internal temperatures, and they were colder than ever at night. Their bodies had used up all their fat. It was working on their muscles. Their minds would go next. They ate some of the hair that fell off their heads. They ate bits of their fingernails. They were dying. And then the rash on Philo's skin reached the point of excruciation. He was under the tarp in the middle of the night and felt what he described as an electric shock across his body. He leapt up. He screamed, "God, please help, take this pain away." He yelled louder, "God, please forgive me." He wanted to tear off his skin. He couldn't stand it any longer. He was finished. He grabbed the machete. He begged Samu to kill him. Stab me, he begged Etweni. I felt like I was burning. I'd rather die than endure the pain. I was screaming at them to stab me. I was serious. Both boys refused. How are you going to see your parents? Samu asked. Eventually, the pain subsided. Exhaustion gripped him, and so they prepared to die. They stopped bailing. It was too much effort. Etweni got sick. He vomited repeatedly, but little came out. It stopped raining. They drank seawater. We all quit, says Etweni, like it makes no difference if we die or live. They were all lying about in the bottom of the boat in the most weakened possible state, covered by the tarp, close to death. And then Samu pulled himself up for a moment to see if rain clouds were coming. And he said one word. He said, "Yes." And he raised his arm and started waving. "Boys," he said, "I can see a boat." Etweni and Philo didn't believe him. A few times before, he had pretended to spot a boat, and when the others looked, he'd laugh. No one else thought it was funny. So they made him promise he wouldn't do it again. Now they thought he was joking once more. "Boys," Samu said again, "get up." There was something in his voice. Philo and Etweni got up, and there, directly in front of them, was a ship, the San Nicanao. I started waving, but I could only lift my arm for a few seconds, says Etweni. I wondered if it was a dream. They feared the ship would pass by. It didn't seem to be stopping. But then, from way above, the ship's navigator, Ty Fredrickson, called out. He asked if they needed help. The boys screamed, yes, and the ship lowered a small rescue boat. Fredrickson snapped a photo. It is an extraordinary and heartbreaking image. 3 naked boys, staring at their rescuer, reduced to skin and bones. Philo and Samu started crying, but Etweni didn't. He was too dehydrated. I couldn't cry, he says. I had no more tears. They had floated some 750 miles. They'd been gone more than 7 weeks. With help, they were too weak to walk. They boarded the San Nikunao. Their dinghy and its engine were also saved, to be returned to Tokelau. They sat in the galley, bewildered and overwhelmed by the scent of food. Fredrickson gave them some electrolyte drink and a bit of bread. Etwaini ate an apple, but it made him sick, and he vomited into a bowl in the kitchen. They showered. They borrowed clothes. Samu made the first phone call. He called his grandmother. There were celebrations across Tokelau. The boys all slept that night in one bed, in Fredrickson's berth. At the Colonial War Memorial Hospital in Fiji's capital, Suva, the boys were treated for extreme dehydration, fungal infections, and second-degree burns. They were anemic. They had elevated heart rates, gross muscle wasting, and widespread infections. Etwaini lost 2 teeth. Leanne Pierce, Tokelau's director of health, says they would likely not have survived another week. They spent a few days in the hospital, then flew to Samoa, where they moved in with a Tokelauan family to rest and recuperate. Samu, who had never before left Tokelau, came down with the chicken pox. Finally, just after Christmas, they were cleared to take the long ferry ride back to Atafu. They made it back to Atafu, where there was a big welcome feast. Samu gave a speech in which he apologized for their actions. Everyone says that God's got things in store for us. They could feel it. Atafu was too small for them. There was too much water everywhere they looked. All that suffering had just brought them back to the place they nearly killed themselves trying to escape. Within 2 months of returning home, they all left Atafu. Philo and Samu went with their families to Australia. Etwaini moved with his family to Hawaii. None of them know if they'll ever go back. For Jose Salvador Alvarenga, his fishing expedition would be horrendous. The shore of Costa Azul came alive in the morning light. The salty breeze carried with it the promise of a good day for fishing, and the fishermen stirred in the quiet village, their day beginning long before most had even stirred in their beds. Jose Salvador Alvarenga stood by the dock, his hands calloused and steady as they worked the lines on his small fiberglass skiff. The boat was nothing fancy, just a bare-bones vessel painted white, its sides scuffed from years of use. It had carried him through countless journeys, and he trusted it. On this morning, as always, he prepared it with quiet efficiency, checking the engine, inspecting the nets, and stocking the provisions. He had chosen the life of a fisherman not out of necessity, but out of love for the sea. The ocean had been part of his life for as long as he could remember. Growing up in the coastal village of Garita Palmera in El Salvador, the waves were his first playground, the fish his first source of income. He learned early on that the sea was a giver but also a taker. It provided food and livelihood but demanded respect and patience in return. Moving to Mexico a few years earlier had been a natural extension of his life's path. The fishing village of Costa Azul, tucked along the southern coast, welcomed him. The language of the sea was universal, and among the fishermen he found camaraderie and purpose. This day, November 17, 2012, began like any other. Jose had taken a contract to fish for shark and sailfish, a profitable catch for his employer. He loaded the boat with just enough supplies for a 30-hour trip, a cooler packed with ice to store the fish, a couple of gallons of water, and a few small bags of tortillas and beans. He traveled light, knowing the boat's space was better used for the haul. Jose's companion for the journey was Ezequiel Cordoba, a young man with limited fishing experience. Alvarenga had initially planned to prepare the boat with his usual mate and trusted companion. However, at the last moment, Perez was unable to join him. Determined to head out to sea, Alvarenga quickly arranged to go with Ezequiel Cordoba instead, a 22-year-old nicknamed Piñata, known around as a standout defender on the village soccer team. Alvarenga and Cordoba had never exchanged a word before, let alone worked together. The boy's inexperience didn't worry him. Jose had enough knowledge for them both. The two men pushed off from the shore as the villagers watched. Some waved, and a few shouted words of encouragement. The morning air was cool, and the sea lay still. a mirror reflecting the sky. It was the kind of calm that fishermen cherished, an omen of a fruitful day. The boat's small motor purred as they headed into deeper waters. Ezekiel sat quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Jose glanced at him, reading the apprehension in his posture, reassuring him there was nothing to fear but to respect the sea. Ezekiel nodded, though he didn't seem convinced. Jose didn't push. He knew the sea would teach its lessons in its own time. By mid-morning they reached their fishing grounds, a spot Jose had visited many times. He cut the engine and the boat bobbed gently on the waves. The two men set to work, casting lines and baiting hooks. The rhythm of fishing was as natural to Jose as breathing, but for Ezekiel, each movement was deliberate, uncertain. The first catch came quickly, a flash of silver beneath the water, the line taut and thrumming. Jose pulled the fish into the boat and then handed the line to Ezekiel for the next cast, guiding his hands. Slowly he began to find his rhythm. The boat filled with their catch, the cooler growing heavy with the promise of a good haul. As the day wore on, the horizon blurred, the sky and sea melding into an endless expanse. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the water. Jose checked the time and calculated their position. They had ventured farther than usual, driven by the lure of abundant fish. He decided they would fish a bit longer before heading back. The ocean remained calm, its surface like glass. But Jose, a man attuned to the sea's moods, felt a strange unease. There was a stillness in the air, a quiet that pressed down on them. He scanned the horizon but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Let's call it for the day," he said finally. Ezekiel began reeling in the lines without argument. The younger man seemed relieved to turn back. As the engine roared to life and the boat began its journey home, Jose cast one last look at the horizon. Something lingered there, a tension he couldn't name. He shook his head and dismissed the thought. The sea was vast, and it often played tricks on the mind. The wind began to pick up as they motored toward shore, and Jose adjusted his grip on the tiller. Ezekiel leaned back, exhaustion written on his face. Jose didn't say it, but he felt proud of the boy. He had done well. The waves began to swell gently, their crests catching the fading light. The shore was still a distant line on the horizon, and Jose focused on the journey ahead. The sea, which had been so giving, now seemed to whisper a different tune, one that spoke of challenges yet to come. But for now, Jose kept his thoughts to himself. The sea was his friend, and it would guide him home. Or so he believed. The first gust of wind came softly, like a whisper. Alvarenga felt it on his face, a fleeting caress that set his instincts on edge. He glanced at the horizon. The clouds were low and gray, spreading their shadows across the sea. He had known storms before. This wasn't yet a storm, but the sea rarely announced its intentions. It acted without mercy, without warning. "The weather's changing," Jose said. He didn't explain further. The boat rocked gently as the waves began to swell. Jose checked the small engine, running his hands over the controls, feeling for any signs of trouble. It wasn't a powerful motor, just enough to push the fiberglass skiff against the current. It had served him well before, but today, it needed to be flawless. The first drops of rain spattered the deck. Jose looked up again. The clouds had thickened. The rain began as the steady rhythm that soaked their clothes and blurred their vision. The sea, once calm, now churned with restless energy. The waves slapped against the hull. Ezekiel sat huddled in the bow, his arms wrapped around his knees. Jose didn't blame him. Fear was a natural response. But fear had no place here. The sea did not care for fear or courage, it only demanded respect. The storm arrived suddenly, as storms at sea often do. The wind howled, driving the rain sideways, sharp as needles against their skin. The waves rose higher. Alvarenga gripped the tiller with hands made steady by years at sea, his eyes fixed on the waves ahead. Each swell rose like a wall before the tiny craft, and he maneuvered through them as a surfer might, leaning into their power, slicing where he could. The coast was out there somewhere, though the storm worked to erase all memory of it. The horizon disappeared, swallowed by the chaos. Around 9 a.m., Alvarenga saw it, a mountain rising on the horizon, its dark outline a promise. His heart leaped. They were close. 2 hours, maybe less. The weather, however, had other plans. The motor, beaten by salt and strain, coughed and sputtered, then fell silent. Alvarenga grabbed the radio, shouting into it, contacting a man back on the docks. "Willie! Willie! Willie! The motor is ruined!" Willie's voice crackled back, calm but distant. "Calm down, man. Give me your coordinates." "We don't have GPS. It's dead. Lay an anchor," Willie ordered. "There's no anchor," Alvarenga shouted, his frustration mounting. He'd noticed it missing before they'd set out, but it hadn't seemed necessary on a deep-sea mission. "Hold tight. We're coming for you," Willie assured him. "Come now," Alvarenga yelled. "I'm getting screwed out here." Those were the last words he would ever speak to the shore. The engine sputtered, choking on salt spray. Jose's hands moved quickly, his fingers working the controls, coaxing life back into the machine. But the storm had other plans. A massive wave crashed over the bow, drenching them both. The engine let out a final desperate wheeze before falling silent. The silence was deafening. Jose stared at the motor, willing it to restart, but the storm's fury was absolute. They were adrift now, a tiny vessel in a vast and merciless ocean. Ezekiel's voice broke through the roar of the wind. "What do we do?" he shouted, his eyes wide with terror. "We bail," Jose replied, tossing a bucket toward him. "Keep the water out of the boat, don't stop." But Cordoba was unraveling. His strong body, made for soccer and hard labor, was no match for the relentless spray and the boat's violent lurches. He clung to the rail, his knuckles white, his stomach heaving into the sea. He had signed on for $50 and the promise of a short trip, but now his cries mixed with the roar of the wind. I can't do this," he screamed, tears streaking his salt-covered face. "Bail, damn it," Alvarenga barked as he started to bail water himself. The boy tried, but terror and exhaustion overtook him. He had strength but no reserve for this. The crashing, the soaking, the fear that their tiny boat would shatter, spilling them into the water for the sharks to take. The storm raged on, unrelenting. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The rain pounded them, the wind screamed in their ears, and the waves seemed determined to swallow them whole. Jose's muscles burned, his hands raw from the constant bailing. But he did not stop. Stopping meant surrender, and surrender meant death. At some point, the storm began to wane, its anger spent. The wind softened, the rain lightened, and the waves lost their teeth. But the damage was done. The storm had stripped them of everything: the cooler of fish, their meager supplies, and their sense of direction. Jose stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was no sign of land, no indication of where they were. The vast, endless sea stretched in every direction, mocking him with its emptiness. Ezekiel slumped against the side of the boat, his face pale and his body trembling. As night fell, the two men huddled together, their boat a fragile speck in an infinite ocean. Above them, the stars emerged, indifferent witnesses to their struggle. The storm was over, but the true ordeal had only just begun. The sun rose on the endless horizon, casting its light across the open ocean, illuminating nothing but water. It had been days. How many? Jose Salvador Alvarenga couldn't say, since the storm had thrust them into the vast, uncaring blue. The little fiberglass boat bobbed gently now, its movements a stark contrast to the fury of the storm that had stripped them of their engine, their supplies, and their sense of direction. The vastness of the ocean was suffocating. By day, the relentless glare of the sun turned the sea into a shimmering, blinding desert. By night, the darkness was so complete it felt like they were drifting through space. Jose sat at the stern, his eyes scanning the water for any sign of land or rescue. None came. The horizon remained a mocking, endless line, always distant, always unreachable. Ezekiel Cordoba lay in the bow, his face pale and his eyes sunken. The young man had spoken little since the storm. The hunger had already begun to gnaw at their bellies, a dull, insistent ache that refused to be ignored. Knowing they had to eat, Jose reached over the side of the boat, looking to catch fish with his bare hands. His hands moved with practiced ease, feeling for movement beneath the surface. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, his fingers closed around something slick and wriggling. He pulled it from the water, a small fish, its silver body flashing in the sunlight. Ezekiel scoffed at the thought of having to eat raw fish. "It's all we have. Eat or you won't have the strength to survive," Jose demanded. Ezekiel hesitated, but hunger eventually overcame him. He tore into the fish with shaking hands, his face contorting as he chewed the raw flesh. Jose watched him for a moment, then turned back to the water. They would need more. The first days were the hardest. Hunger gnawed at them constantly, an invisible predator stalking their every moment. They learned to eat whatever the sea provided, small fish, jellyfish, and the occasional turtle that wandered too close to the boat. Jose showed Ezekiel how to crack open the turtle's shell, how to drink its blood for hydration, and how to chew its meat without thinking of the taste. Rainwater became their most precious resource. When the skies opened, they held out their hands, mouths, and makeshift containers to catch every drop. On days without rain, they were forced to drink their own urine, a grim necessity Jose didn't bother to justify. Survival left no room for pride. The sun became their enemy, beating down on them with merciless intensity. Jose's skin, already weathered from years at sea, turned dark and cracked, blistering under the relentless heat. Ezekiel, younger and less hardened, suffered more. His face and arms were raw, his lips split and bleeding. At night, the cold was just as brutal, seeping into their bones and leaving them shivering. Time became meaningless. The days blended into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. Jose kept his focus on survival, his mind occupied with the next meal, the next drop of water. He refused to think beyond the present. To dwell on the enormity of their predicament was to invite despair. Ezekiel was less resilient. The boy grew quieter, his spirit dimming with each passing day. He stared out at the horizon for hours, his expression vacant. When he spoke, his words were tinged with hopelessness. One day, Jose caught a bird, a small sea-bound creature that had strayed too close. He wrung its neck quickly and efficiently, then plucked its feathers. The meat was tough and stringy, but it was sustenance. Ezekiel refused to eat it first, his face twisted in disgust. "Eat, you need your strength," Jose insisted. "I can't do this anymore." Ezekiel repulsed. Jose grabbed him by the shoulders, his grip firm, and insisted he eat. Ezekiel stared at him, tears streaming down his face. Slowly, he nodded. He took a bite of the bird, his hands trembling. Jose sat back, exhaustion washing over him. He didn't know how long they could keep this up, but he knew one thing. As long as they were alive, there was hope. And hope was enough, for now. The hunger became a constant companion, an ache that never fully left. It was a battle they fought every day with no end in sight. But Jose held on, driven by a single unshakable belief that somewhere beyond the horizon there was land, and he would find it. After weeks adrift, Alvarenga and Cordoba became scavengers of the sea, adept at spotting the stray treasures the ocean surrendered. They learned the types of plastic that floated past, with each piece a possible lifeline. They plucked empty water bottles from the waves, storing them with care. One day, a green trash bag floated within reach. They snared it, hauled it aboard, and tore it open. Inside, a lump of chewed gum. They divided it, savoring the almond-sized morsel as though it were a feast, its fleeting flavor a cruel reminder of forgotten pleasures. Beneath layers of oily refuse, they struck gold. A half head of cabbage, a few limp carrots, and a quart of milk. The milk had soured, but they drank it, letting the thick, curdled liquid slide down their throats. It was the first fresh food they'd seen in weeks. For a brief time, with backup food stored and a turtle's meat in their bellies, the men found respite. They talked as the sea stretched endlessly around them. They spoke of their mothers, and for God to forgive them for being bad sons, with promises of working harder when they returned. But the promises rang hollow, born of guilt and longing. They both knew it was too late. 2 months passed, and Alvarenga adapted to the cruel rhythms of survival. He caught birds, wringing their necks with practiced hands, and pried meat from the tough shells of sea turtles. But Cordoba was fading. The young man had grown weaker since eating raw seabirds, and the sickness never left him. He made a choice Alvarenga couldn't understand. He stopped eating. At first, Alvarenga coaxed him, offering slivers of bird meat or a bite of turtle. Cordoba clenched his lips shut, refusing. He gripped a water bottle but had neither the energy nor the will to lift it to his mouth. Depression gripped him like a tide pulling him under, and no words from Alvarenga could bring him back. One day, they made a pact. If Cordoba survived, he promised to visit Alvarenga's parents in El Salvador. And if Alvarenga lived, he swore to find Cordoba's mother in Mexico. "Tell her I am sorry I couldn't say goodbye," Cordoba said. "Tell her not to make tamales for me anymore. Let her know I've gone with God." "I will tell her," Alvarenga replied. He meant it. By the time Cordoba's strength had gone, he could barely speak. "I am dying," he whispered one morning. His voice was dry, brittle, like a leaf crumbling in the hand. Alvarenga brought a water bottle to his lips, tilting it gently. But Cordoba did not swallow. Instead, his body tensed, small convulsions rippling through him. Alvarenga's heart raced. "Don't leave me, fight for life. What am I supposed to do here alone?" he agonized. Cordoba's face was pale, his eyes open but empty. His last breath rattled out, and he was gone. Alvarenga froze, his mind unable to accept it. He propped Cordoba's body in the bow of the boat, fearing a wave might wash it overboard. He sat with the corpse for hours, weeping openly, his sobs swallowed by the vast ocean. The next morning, Alvarenga stared at the lifeless form of his companion. He spoke aloud, asking the same questions they used to share. "How was your sleep?" he asked. Then, in a hollow imitation of Cordoba's voice, he answered, "I slept well. And you? Have you had breakfast?" The easiest way to face the solitude was to pretend Cordoba hadn't died. Day after day, Alvarenga kept up the charade. He spoke with the corpse as if the young man were still alive, his voice steady, his mind slipping further from reality. 6 days passed this way. One moonless night, as Alvarenga sat in the dark, deep in conversation with his dead companion, he suddenly snapped to clarity. He was talking to a corpse. Resolute now, Alvarenga moved to the body. He washed Cordoba's feet, an act of reverence. The young man's clothes were still useful, so Alvarenga stripped the sweatshirt and shorts from his stiffening frame. He pulled on the red sweatshirt, its pattern of skull and crossbones oddly cheerful, and finally prepared to say goodbye. Sliding Cordoba's body over the edge, Alvarenga hesitated. He spoke one last time to the friend he'd lost. Then he let go. The body slipped into the water, disappearing beneath the waves. As it vanished, the weight of it all overwhelmed him. Alvarenga fainted, collapsing into the tiny boat, alone with the sea and his grief. When Alvarenga awoke, fear gripped him. The weight of Cordoba's death pressed on him, but his will to live, and his mother's words that suicide would bar him from heaven, kept him scanning the horizon. Sunrise and sunset were his best chances. The light sharpened shapes, turning smudges into silhouettes. He could spot a ship as a speck on the horizon, identify its type, a container vessel or a tanker, and then wave and shout until his voice gave out. They passed, cold and indifferent. Some 20 ships crossed his path, and though they offered no rescue, each sighting renewed his desperate hope. As weeks turned into months, the solitude was unbearable, so Alvarenga turned to imagination. He tasted the finest meals, felt the deepest love, and walked the world, all within the confines of his tiny boat. "I paced back and forth, pretending I was exploring new lands," he said. It kept him alive, a defense against despair. He marked the time by the moon's cycles, counting 15 full ones since he had first drifted. He often thought heaven was his next stop. Then the birds came. They filled the sky, wheeling and crying, their presence a promise. Alvarenga followed their path and saw it. A green island rising from the mist, surrounded by turquoise waters. He froze, afraid it was another hallucination. But the land stayed vivid and real. He watched it for hours, calculating his chance of reaching it. It was small, wild, no bigger than a football field. The sight did not fill him with joy. Not immediately. Joy required energy, and he had none left. His body was a shell, barely more than bone and sun-scorched skin. His thoughts were slow, but somewhere deep inside a spark flickered. The ordeal might end after all. With his knife, he severed the line of buoys that had steadied him for months. Without them, the boat would be vulnerable to storms, but he needed speed, not safety. The gamble paid off. The waves pushed his small boat toward the jagged reef of the island. The atoll rose like a fortress encircled by coral that seemed determined to keep him at bay. The boat scraped against the reef, grinding to a halt. Jose struggled to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. The motion was foreign after so many days of sitting and lying in the boat. He stumbled, nearly falling before stepping into the shallow water. The sensation of sand beneath his feet was overwhelming. He had been drifting for so long, the ocean his only companion. To feel solid ground was almost painful, the earth unfamiliar and strange. The sun bore down as he staggered onto the beach, his limbs heavy, his vision blurred. He collapsed into the sand, gasping for breath. Face down in the sand, he clawed at it, grabbing a handful. "I held it like a treasure," he said later. Finally, after more than a year, 438 days to be precise, he was on solid ground. Although he didn't know it, Alvarenga had washed ashore on Tile Islet, a small island in the Ebon Atoll, on the southern tip of the 1,156 islands that make up the Republic of the Marshall Islands, one of the most remote spots on Earth. Jose Salvador Alvarenga crawled naked through the jungle, his knees and hands scraping against sharp coconut shells and damp palm fronds. He was too weak to walk more than a few steps before collapsing. The scent of salt and rotting vegetation filled his nostrils as he stumbled forward. Finally, he stood at the edge of a narrow canal, staring across at a small beach house. A man and a woman appeared, their faces a mix of curiosity and alarm. "I saw this white man yelling. He looked weak, starving. I thought he must have fallen off a ship," Emi Libokmeto said. Tentatively, they approached him. Alvarenga tried to explain being adrift for more than a year at sea. He drew stick figures. A man, a boat, and the endless ocean. But the shapes felt hollow. Frustrated, he asked for medicine, for a doctor. The couple smiled kindly, their words unintelligible to him due to the language barrier. When they began to laugh, Alvarenga laughed too. He didn't know why, only that the sound felt good. "I was laughing because I was saved," he said later. An island inhabitant sailed to Ebon's main town to fetch help. By afternoon, a nurse and police officers arrived to take Alvarenga back. He hesitated initially, unsure of leaving the shore he had long dreamed of. But they coaxed him aboard, and he finally relented. Word of Alvarenga's arrival spread quickly. Soon he was taken by boat to Majuro, the capital of the Marshall Islands, where he was placed in the care of doctors and local officials. The journey was short compared to the 438 days he had spent at sea, but it felt monumental. As the boat cut through the water, Alvarenga's mind remained fixed on the events that had brought him here. He thought of Cordoba, the young man whose life had slipped away in the middle of the ocean. He thought of the sharks, the turtles, the storms that had threatened to end him. He thought of the nights spent staring at the stars, talking to a corpse, praying for rescue. And now, here he was, alive. Doctors at the hospital in the Marshall Islands treated Alvarenga for severe malnutrition and swelling in his legs. They noted scars and tissue damage from prolonged exposure. Alvarenga answered their questions as best he could, his voice hoarse from disuse. A wild-looking man washing ashore on a remote Pacific atoll spread worldwide. The lone phone line in Ebon became a lifeline for newsrooms around the world, wondering if this was true or a hoax. The evidence supported his tale. His boat's registration matched records from when he'd set sail on November 17, 2012. Jaime Marroquin, a Mexican search and rescue official, confirmed a desperate search had been launched for Alvarenga and Cordoba when they disappeared. The length of his voyage was calculated as 5,500 to 6,700 miles, or 8,900 to 10,800 kilometers across the Pacific Ocean. After 11 days, Alvarenga's health stabilized enough for travel. Diagnosed with anemia and suspected liver parasites from eating raw meat, he was sent home to El Salvador to reunite with his family. In El Salvador, the celebration of survival was muted by memories of Córdoba. Alvarenga traveled to Mexico to meet Córdoba's mother, Ana Rosa. Sitting with her for hours, he answered her questions, sharing every detail of her son's last days. It wasn't the same to survive without him, Alvarenga admitted. But life on land was far from simple. He feared the sight of water and couldn't sleep in darkness. The press overwhelmed him, and he appointed a lawyer to handle the onslaught of requests. Later, a dispute over representation led to lawsuits, adding stress to a man already grappling with his trauma. It took a year before Alvarenga could comprehend the enormity of his ordeal. Studying maps of his drift across the Pacific, he pieced together his journey. For 438 days, he had fought hunger, thirst, storms, and madness. He had survived the death of his only companion and endured loneliness that clawed at his sanity. "I suffered greatly, but I didn't take my life. You only get one chance to live. Appreciate it," Alvarenga said. Alvarenga's story remains one of the most extraordinary tales of survival. He had faced the ocean's full fury, surviving on wit, grit, and an unshakable will to live. Though he would never return to the sea, Alvarenga carried its lessons with him. He knew its beauty and its cruelty, its power to give and to take. And in its vastness, he had found himself broken, battered, but alive. For Brett Archibald, the Mentawai Strait would be a place of pending doom. It began on a surfing trip to Mentawai Island with 9 friends in the Mentawai Strait near Indonesia's West Sumatra province in April 2013. A group of friends who've known each other since they were 5 years old started doing this trip when they were younger. Mentawai Island is off the west coast of Sumatra. You fly to a tiny little town called Padang, then jump on a boat. Surfing on Mentawai Island is a mecca for surfers. Featured in countless surf movies and magazines with perfect waves and endless barrels, visiting this island is one of the most sought-after surfing trips on the planet. Before heading out to the island, they bought 3 extra-large calzone pizzas at a local eatery. But as they opened the calzone, it had a putrid odor. But one of the friends, Mauritius, who's lovingly called by his friends Banger, promptly eats half his portion. Brett took a few bites, but it tasted disgusting. "That thing is poison, it's water buffalo and it's rancid," Archibald said. Fast forward a few hours, they got into their boat and headed downriver before heading out to sea. Brett was tired and wanted to get some good sleep before a big day of surfing ahead of him. Brett woke up at 1:30 a.m. in the morning with a sick feeling in his stomach. He promptly gets up, stumbles to the bathroom, and begins vomiting. "I was hot and sweating and thought I have to get to some fresh air," Brett said. He walked to the back of the boat and there was Banger, lying on the lower level of the boat, seawater and diesel fumes washing all around him. He helped him up to the top deck. Then Archibald went to the side of the boat over the railing and began vomiting again. After the 3rd time, Brett says to himself, "If I vomit again, I'm gonna black out." Green with sickness, slouched over the railing at the mercy of his internal organs to fight off the poison. Brett feels it coming again. Archibald blacks out. The next thing he knew, he was in the water, tumbling around. He fell 20 feet off the top deck, hit the water, and was sucked under the boat. Eventually, he made it to the surface. As he looks around, he sees a devastating sight. He swam with everything he had. "I just watched the lights of the boat disappear." He screamed with everything he had, but realized very quickly that they were never going to hear him. As the boat continued into the distance, he stares up at the sky, his ears pricking up at the sound of an animalistic cry that was coming from within. No one had seen him fall overboard. His first thought was that he was going to die. It was dark, and he was alone in the middle of the ocean. Brett Archibald will never forget the feeling of doom while watching a charter boat sail away into darkness after he fell overboard in the Indian Ocean. "I get goosebumps just reliving it," he recounts. But Archibald didn't panic. He started to do the math, figuring it would be at least 7 hours until his friends realized he was missing. and about another 7 hours until they were able to return to his location. So with this grim realization, he started reciting cell phone contacts, went through his book and CD collections, title by title, and sang Elton John songs while swimming with the current to keep his mind occupied. As a surfer, endurance athlete, and strong swimmer, he knew that he needed to take a deep breath and swim through any oncoming waves. As the hours passed, he began to fight cramps, dehydration, and the stings of jellyfish. He fell asleep. He was woken by a violent smash to the back of his head. He was being attacked by a seagull. His left eye and nose exploded in blood and feathers. Then he saw a second seagull. They circled around him, dive-bombing and squawking, straight out of a scene from the movie The Birds. He had the idea that he could catch one and drink the blood for some type of subsistence. By then they flew off. The silver lining from this attack was it gave him hope. Seagulls roost on land, so that meant the direction he was floating was towards land. It was not Brett's only encounter with life out in the ocean. About 14 hours in, he sees his mates. The boat is about 250 meters away from him. It stops. He could see his friends' faces, their anguish and worry patrolling around the deck looking from Brett. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, splashing the water, trying to get their attention. He's sure they see him. A few minutes later, the engine starts up and his friends take off. He was demoralized. Around 15 hours after first falling overboard, he felt a bump to the back of his left kidney. He thought it was a barracuda initially, but the thing nudged him again. It was a shark. He thought it looked the size of a bus. But he was scared and his mind was exaggerating things. He caught a glimpse of the shark. The fear and exhaustion were almost overwhelming. Thinking he was going to die from a shark attack, Brett was beginning to feel like giving up. But his surfing and boating training took over. Then he noticed the black edgings of its vertical fin. It was a black-tip reef shark. As a keen surfer in South Africa, where the shark also resides, he knew it was not a risk to humans and would not be his cause of death, but perhaps his means of rescue. Brett began plotting how to hold on to the shark, hoping it would pull him closer to shore. He found new hope in the burst of opportunity. Then the shark lost interest and swam away. Even though he was attacked by seagulls and had a scary encounter with a shark, the tiny little silver fish that nibbled his skin was the most painful of the ordeal. The backs of his legs were raw from kicking against his shorts, and the fish got to the raw flesh and started eating. He couldn't get them away no matter how he kicked, screamed, and splashed the water. "It was the most horrendous thing I've ever felt in my life, ever," Archibald said. The adrenaline rush from the shark encounter left him completely exhausted. He truly believed he could not go on any longer. He was becoming despondent, coming up with crazy ideas of writing a note to his wife in his skin, but later realized sharks would be attracted to him. But he kept swimming. He knew the currents would be his savior. All currents lead to land, so he kept following the current, swimming breaststroke, trying to keep his head above water. He was running out of energy very quickly. At one point, he was so dejected he swam down, trying to drown himself. He couldn't, so he laid on his back and filled his lungs with water 3 times. He spits the water out. Then he thought, "I'm not going to do this. I needed to fight for my family." Then he started to hallucinate. He saw the Virgin Mary in this cloud, a 1634 Dutch East India schooner. He could hear the rigging creaking, guys on ladders down the side of the boat. They even spoke to him. They said, "Swim, young man." Meanwhile, after his friends saw he had not arrived for breakfast, they contacted the Indonesian Coast Guard, who coordinated a search and rescue effort. One of the boats that joined in the rescue efforts was headed by Aussie skipper Tony Doris Eltherington, captain of the Barrenjoey. Eltherington, a surfing legend in the 70s, sailed the world surfing alone and now runs a charter in the Mentawai Islands, a sea salt of the ocean. There was only one rule Tony lived by: never leave anyone behind. When he heard of the missing surfer, he had to go searching for him. "I just think it's the right thing to do," Tony says. "I wasn't going to give up on him, no way." Tony docks from the small village on the Mentawai Island to Apajit. He plotted a search area and organized a search party with 4 other Australian boats, while the Indonesian Coast Guard gave up on the search and left him for dead. Tony didn't. He knew that in the warm, tropical waters of the Indian Ocean, someone could survive for a while. Tony noticed that the current was running north, not south as it usually does. So on a hunch, Tony turns the Barrenjoey around and heads north. Brett Archibald was having feelings again of drowning himself. It's been 27 hours, and he felt he couldn't go on any longer. So he swam down to drown himself, but he couldn't do it. When he surfaced, he saw this little red cross. He thought he was hallucinating again. So he had a conversation with God. He thought he was taunting him again, so he told him to shove the cross where it fits best. But slowly, this cross got bigger and bigger, and he clearly saw the mast. He screamed. Then he heard the roar of the boat and realized they'd spotted him. They changed course and sailed to him, shaking and in pain, his eyes swollen and his feet, lips, and hands nearly bloodless. He was rescued and taken for a medical assessment nearby. He had lost nearly 13 pounds in the water. A medic on board estimated that he only had about another hour to live if he wasn't rescued. He returned to his mates, had a meal, and went to sleep. He woke up 5 hours later. The boat was like a morgue because everybody was so exhausted from the ordeal. They believed their friend was dead. He went and sat on the little bench where he fell overboard, thinking, how did this happen? Then he started sobbing. The captain of their boat was awake, and he came and put his arms around Brett's shoulders and started sobbing as well, the two of them. As dawn was rising, he said to the skipper, "You have to put me back in the ocean. There's no way. I'm tying you to the boat if I have to." He believed he would never go back into the ocean if he didn't do it right away. So the next day, after spending 27 hours stranded in the open ocean, Brett Archibald went back into the sea and spent hours sitting on his surfboard, climbing off, swimming in the ocean, and riding waves. For Ernest Shackleton and the crew of the Endurance, their Antarctica expedition would be a legendary story of survival. In August 1914, just as the world was being drawn into the turmoil of World War I, Sir Ernest Shackleton and his crew set sail aboard the Endurance, embarking on the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition. Their goal was audacious: to achieve the first land crossing of the Antarctic continent. Shackleton was already a prominent figure in the field of Antarctic exploration, having come within striking distance of the South Pole in previous expeditions. His leadership style, characterized by his charisma, steadfast optimism, and paternal care for his crew, would be crucial for the hardships to come. While the primary objective was the transcontinental crossing, the expedition also aimed to gather comprehensive scientific data and samples, contributing to the geographical and scientific knowledge of Antarctica at the time. In the early years of the 20th century, the world's attention turned toward the most remote and inhospitable landscapes on Earth, the polar regions. It was an era driven by the spirit of exploration, a quest not just for land but for the boundaries of human courage and endurance. Among those drawn to these desolate frontiers was Ernest Shackleton, a man whose name would become synonymous with Antarctic exploration and survival. The stage was set in an era of maritime exploits and geographical contests known as the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Nations vied for glory, planting flags in the ice and claiming the polar wastes in the name of science and sovereignty. It was a time when maps still harbored blank spaces, and the Antarctic was the most tantalizing of them all. Shackleton had already tasted the sting of polar winds and the bite of deep cold in his earlier ventures. His first significant experience came as a young officer on Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery expedition from 1901 to 1904. There, Shackleton learned the harsh realities of polar travel, but also felt the pull of uncharted lands. His ambition grew, not just to explore, but to lead, and soon he commanded his own expedition aboard the Nimrod from 1907 to 1909. His team came agonizingly close to the South Pole, defeated by the ice yet undeterred in spirit. During the Nimrod expedition, he and his 3 companions established a new record, farthest south latitude, 97 nautical miles from the South Pole, the largest advance to the pole in exploration history. The expedition team climbed Mount Erebus, the most active Antarctic volcano. Shackleton was knighted for his achievements by King Edward VII. Besides the official honors bestowed on Shackleton, his Antarctic feats were greeted in Britain with great enthusiasm. He still harbored thoughts of returning south. Shackleton's future endeavors to reach the South Pole were contingent on the outcomes of Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova expedition that set off in June 1910. By early 1912, it was known globally that Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had reached the pole. However, the status of Scott's expedition remained unclear at that time. Scott and his 4 companions reached the pole on January 17, 1912, only to discover that Amundsen's team had beaten them there by 34 days. Tragically, Scott and his team perished on their return journey, with their bodies, journals, and photographs later recovered by a rescue team. With the pole now conquered, Shackleton shifted his focus to a previously proposed yet abandoned idea by British explorer William Speirs Bruce, a transcontinental crossing of Antarctica beginning at the Weddell Sea and concluding in McMurdo Sound. Bruce, who had not secured the necessary funds, was willing for Shackleton to pursue this plan. This route bore similarities to that of German explorer Wilhelm Filchner, who had departed from Bremerhaven in May 1911. By December 1912, news reached Shackleton that Filchner's expedition had also failed. Shackleton saw the transcontinental journey as the one great main object of Antarctic journeyings that remained, and it was now his to undertake. The preparations for Shackleton's most ambitious journey, the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition, began amid a world sliding toward conflict. The ship chosen for this voyage, the Endurance, was built to withstand the deadliest that the polar seas could muster. Fitted with a sturdy wooden hull and equipped with the latest navigational instruments, she was a floating fortress ready to take on the Antarctic. Despite the outbreak of the First World War on August 3, 1914, Endurance was directed by the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, to proceed and leave British waters on August 8th. Shackleton delayed his own departure until September 27th, meeting the ship in Buenos Aires. On setting sail for South Georgia at the end of October, he sent a cablegram to the Daily Chronicle conveying the patriotic message, "We hope in our small way to add victories in science and discovery to that certain victory which our nation will achieve in the cause of honor and liberty." So, with the world at war, the Endurance set sail from South Georgia, heading into the Weddell Sea, towards glory and into calamity. The goal was unprecedented, to traverse the continent via the pole from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, where a support team, the Ross Sea Party, would lay critical supply depots. The enormity of this logistical challenge was matched only by the dangers of the journey, yet the promise of completing the first crossing of Antarctica drove them forward. But the Antarctic was indifferent to human ambition. As the Endurance slipped her moorings, Shackleton stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the horizon. Beside him, a crew of 27 men, each chosen for their expertise and courage, shared quiet nods of resolve. These men were not just sailors and scientists. They were now brothers in a quest against one of Earth's last true wildernesses. The journey to the Weddell Sea was fraught with challenges. Shackleton, ever the vigilant leader, navigated the Endurance through treacherous waters, dodging icebergs that towered like skyscrapers and cutting through pack ice that gripped at the hull. As they ventured farther south, daylight waned, and the Antarctic winter began to tighten its hold. The sun dipped below the horizon, not to rise again for months, plunging the crew into a twilight world lit only by the eerie glow of the ice and the stars above. It was during these dark days that the true test of their mettle began. The cold was relentless, seeping into every layer of clothing and chilling to the bone. But the Endurance pushed on, her engines a constant hum against the silence of the ice. The men gathered around the warmth of the boiler. As they approached the heart of the Antarctic, the ice grew thicker, and the sea became a maze of pressure ridges and open leads. The Endurance was not merely a ship now, she was their lifeline. Each creaks and groans under the strain of the ice, gripping the crew with fear. Then, one fateful day, the ice closed in with a finality that halted their progress. The Endurance was trapped, the ice compressing around her with a force that no man or material could withstand. Shackleton watched as the landscape transformed, the sea becoming a plain of ice that held them fast. It was here, in the clutches of the Antarctic's icy grip, that their true journey of survival would begin. Under the command of Sir Ernest Shackleton, the sturdy ship had been their home, their sanctuary against the cold. But as winter deepened, the ice, which had first hindered their progress, now relentlessly gripped the Endurance. It was late 1915 when the ice began to close in around them. The temperatures plummeted, and the inexorable force of the ocean currents beneath drove the ice pack. Every day the ice's pressure grew stronger, and the haunting creaks and groans of the ship's timbers were a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Shackleton, ever watchful, knew the danger was mounting. The crew, initially buoyed by the novelty and camaraderie of their predicament, now faced the reality of their situation. The endless expanse of white, the screeching winds, and the creeping cold seeped into every aspect of their lives, a constant battle not just against the elements, but against the gnawing fear of what might come. As the weeks turned into months, the Endurance became imprisoned within a vast sea of ice. Shackleton and his crew were forced to make heartbreaking decisions for survival, which included culling some of the dogs, which became valued companions during the ordeal. This was done to conserve the limited food supplies available for the human members of the expedition. The men attempted to break the ice with picks and shovels, a futile effort against the might of the frozen landscape that stretched endlessly around them. Shackleton watched as his ship, designed to be unyielding against the ice's assault, was slowly crushed under the immense pressure. The timbers began to splinter and crack, a grim symphony to the ears of the stranded men. One night, the situation reached its peak. The ice, moaning and shifting, dealt a crushing blow, and the Endurance shuddered violently under the impact. The men were roused from their bunks and rushed out onto the deck to witness the horrifying sight. Their ship, the embodiment of their hopes for crossing Antarctica, was being consumed by the ice. Shackleton's heart sank as he saw the hull breach, water rushing into the lower compartments. Yet in this moment of despair, his resolve did not waver. "Stand by to abandon ship," he called out. Gathering his crew, he spoke words of encouragement, his voice a steady beacon in the chaos. "She may sink, but we shall still go on. Remember, it is the lives of men, not the name of a ship, that truly matter." With the ship doomed, Shackleton ordered the salvage of every possible supply: food, clothing, and crucial navigational instruments. The crew worked tirelessly, knowing that their survival now depended on what they could carry onto the ice. Lifeboats, provisions, and sled dogs were hauled out onto the ice sheet, and a makeshift camp was established amidst the desolate white. The loss of the Endurance was not just the end of their expedition, but the beginning of an even more perilous phase of their journey. The crew, now truly isolated, faced the Antarctic's full fury. Shackleton, looking out over the ice that held them captive, planned their next move. The goal was no longer the crossing of Antarctica, but the far more daunting task of simply surviving it. As the night progressed, the Endurance began to deteriorate. The ice, indifferent to the fates of men, continued its assault. The ship's stern rose as the ice pushed her bow into the water, tilting her into a grotesque angle. Shackleton stood by, watching the destruction of his ship, a poignant moment that marked the end of their expedition's primary mission. By dawn, the scene was one of desolation. The Endurance was trapped, her hull breached and crushed, a victim to the very environment they had sought to conquer. The ship that had been their home, their hope, was now just debris scattered on the ice. The men, now fully dependent on their own resilience, stood beside Shackleton, their faces etched with the stark reality of their situation. Shackleton addressed his crew, his words imbued with a resolve to survive. "The ship is gone, gentlemen, but our expedition is not over. We shall find a way home, guided by the same courage that brought us here. Let us salvage what we can and prepare for the next leg of our journey." With the Endurance sunk into the Antarctic abyss, the crew set up camp on the floating ice. They named their new grim abode Patience Camp, as they prepared for the long wait for the ice to break up, a wait that would test the limits of human endurance and leadership. In the icy wilderness, with no hope of rescue, Shackleton's leadership transformed. It was no longer about Antarctic glory, but about the sheer survival of his men. In the wake of the Endurance's destruction, the icy plains of Antarctica became both the backdrop and crucible for one of the greatest leadership tales in the annals of exploration. Sir Ernest Shackleton, whose dream of crossing the Antarctic continent was buried beneath the ice along with his ship, now faced a far graver challenge. The environment was brutal and unforgiving, but it was Shackleton's leadership that kindled a flame of hope within his crew. As precious food supplies ran low, both the men and the remaining dogs faced starvation. The difficult decision was made to euthanize more dogs. Shackleton wrote, "It was the worst job that we had had throughout the expedition, and we felt their loss keenly." As the men faced the grim reality of their situation, Shackleton's role transcended that of a leader. He became their compass, guiding them not just through the physical landscape but through the psychological ordeal of their entrapment. He maintained a routine for the crew, assigning duties and ensuring that each man had a purpose, a critical factor in keeping despair at bay. Shackleton's empathy was a beacon of strength. He knew each of his crew members by name, understood their personalities, and could gauge their spirits. He made it a point to spend time with each man, sharing meals, listening to their concerns, and bolstering their spirits. His open tent policy, where anyone could speak with him at any time, fostered a sense of unity and mutual respect. As winter relinquished its hold, the Antarctic spring approached. As the months passed and the ice showed no signs of relenting, Shackleton realized that waiting for rescue was futile. They needed to act if they were to survive. In April 1916, the shifting ice began to signal a possible escape for Shackleton and his crew. Having endured months of confinement on a drifting ice floe, the desperate men were now faced with a new challenge. The ice that had trapped them was breaking up, both a hazard and a beacon of hope. Shackleton, keenly aware of their slim chances, knew they needed to reach open water to make any attempt at reaching civilization. This led to one of his most daring decisions, the order to march across the ice towards open water. The preparation for the escape was meticulous and grueling. Shackleton divided the crew into groups, assigning them tasks ranging from manning the lifeboats to distributing the meager rations. The men salvaged materials from their makeshift camp on the ice to fortify the lifeboats against the harsh ocean conditions they would soon face. The crew began dragging the lifeboats across the weakening ice, a perilous task as the ice could give way at any moment, plunging them into the freezing waters below. The physical toll was immense. The men were weakened by months of inadequate nutrition and the relentless cold. The original intention was to trek across the ice toward land, but that plan was scrapped when the men covered only 7.5 miles in 7 days. There was no alternative, wrote Shackleton, but to camp once more on the floe, and to possess our souls, with what patience we could till conditions should appear more favorable for a renewal of the attempt to escape. Gradually, the ice moved further northward, and on April 7, 1916, they caught sight of the snow-capped peaks of Clarence and Elephant Islands, filling them with hope. "The floe has been a good friend to us," wrote Shackleton in his diary, "but it is reaching the end of its journey and is liable at any time now to break up." It was around this time that the men knew more difficult decisions had to be made regarding the remaining sled dogs. Many of the men, including the dog handlers, had developed strong attachments to the animals, who had provided companionship and a psychological boost during their long entrapment on the ice. The decision to euthanize them was not taken lightly and added to the already considerable stress and despair faced by the crew. These actions, while distressing, were deemed essential for survival. Shackleton recognized that the journey to the island in the lifeboats would be impossible with the dogs, both in terms of logistics and insufficient food supplies. The decision to euthanize the remaining dogs was taken with great reluctance. Still, Shackleton and his men understood that not only did their survival depend on it, but it would be sympathetic rather than leave them to starve to death. One by one, the dogs were euthanized by a bullet to the head. On April 9th, the ice split beneath them with a mighty crack. Shackleton commanded to dismantle the camp and launch the boats, and suddenly, they were liberated from the ice that had alternately troubled and supported them. Now they faced a fresh adversary, the open ocean. After a painstaking journey across the treacherous ice, the crew finally reached a stretch of open water. They launched the lifeboats into the icy sea, embarking on what would be a perilous journey. The boats, heavily laden with men and supplies, were buffeted by the cold, southern ocean. The men took turns rowing, their bodies pushed to the limits of human endurance. The sea journey tested their resolve as they faced towering waves and chilling winds. Navigation was a constant challenge. The physical conditions were brutal, with each man soaked by the freezing spray, battling hypothermia and exhaustion. It blasted freezing spray, hurled frigid water, and tossed the boats from side to side, bringing courageous men to the fetal position as they grappled with the elements and seasickness. Amidst it all, Captain Worsley skillfully navigated through the spray and the squalls until, after 6 days at sea, Clarence and Elephant Islands emerged just 30 miles or 48 kilometers ahead. The men were depleted. Worsley had not slept for 80 hours. Some were debilitated by seasickness, others tormented by dysentery. Frank Wild, Shackleton's second in command, observed that at least half the party were insane. Nevertheless, they steadfastly rowed towards their objective and reached the shore of Elephant Island. After 5 days of grueling navigation in the ocean, the sight of land sparked a mixture of relief and apprehension. Elephant Island, a desolate and inhospitable place, offered no natural resources or hope of rescue. It was the first time the men had set foot on solid ground after more than a year on ice. Under Shackleton's guidance, the crew set to work with the remnants of the lifeboats and salvaged materials to construct a makeshift camp. They overturned the boats to create crude shelters, which they supplemented with canvas and any other materials that could provide insulation against the biting wind and freezing temperatures. This camp, which they named Point Wild, became their base of operations on the island. The exhausted crew of the Endurance experienced a mix of relief and despair. While the island provided a refuge from the relentless sea, it was stark, rocky, and entirely inhospitable. There were no trees, no sources of food, and no shelter apart from the bleak cliffs that loomed over them. The men, having dragged their lifeboats ashore, faced the immediate task of constructing a sustainable living environment in this desolate landscape. While it provided an escape from the lifeboats, the island was merely a temporary refuge, a place to gather strength and plan the next phase of their survival. As with being trapped on the ice shelf, Shackleton was deeply concerned about the mental and physical health of his men. Again, he organized daily routines to keep the crew busy and morale high. These routines included hunting for seals and penguins, which were crucial for food and for replenishing their oil supplies, maintaining a sense of purpose and community that was vital for their survival. The crew faced constant threats of frostbite, vitamin deficiencies, and the psychological toll of isolation. They survived on a diet of seal and penguin meat, which, while nutritious, became monotonous over time. Realizing that the chance of a passing ship spotting them was virtually non-existent, Shackleton made the pivotal decision to seek help. Selecting 5 of his most able men to join him on this mission, he prepared for the perilous open boat journey to South Georgia, where he knew there were whaling stations. The preparation for this journey was meticulous. Shackleton chose the strongest of the remaining lifeboats, the James Caird, reinforcing it to withstand the tumultuous ocean crossing. The crew modified the James Caird with a makeshift deck of canvas and wood. They salvaged nails and screws from the wreckage, waterproofed seams with seal blood, and fashioned a rudimentary sail. The departure was a somber moment, as the men left behind were well aware of the dangers their captain and comrades were about to face. Yet there was a palpable sense of hope, for Shackleton's leadership had instilled in them an unbreakable belief in their mission and in each other. After the men set off, the wait began. The men left on Elephant Island settled into a routine that was both monotonous and essential for their survival. They kept daily watches for rescue, maintained a signal fire, and continued to improve their living conditions as much as possible. The psychological burden of not knowing when or if they would be rescued was immense. However, the discipline and routines established by Shackleton kept the group cohesive and focused on survival. The journey to South Georgia was fraught with immense dangers. Shackleton navigated using only a sextant and the stars, facing monstrous waves, freezing temperatures, and the constant threat of capsizing. The James Caird was constantly battered by the furious sea, with Shackleton and his men tirelessly bailing out water to keep the boat afloat. The small crew faced sleep deprivation, hypothermia, and saltwater sores. They subsisted on a sparse diet of rations, supplemented by occasional catches of fish and rainwater collected during storms. Despite the physical and mental toll, Shackleton's leadership remained resolute, his determination unyielding. He kept his men focused and motivated, knowing that any lapse in their effort could be fatal. After 16 days of grueling navigation, land was sighted. The relief was overwhelming, but their ordeal was not over yet. The next day, they were able to land on the unoccupied southern shore, and a period of rest and recuperation followed. They still needed to traverse the mountainous island to reach the whaling stations on the northern side. Rather than risking another sea journey to reach the whaling stations on the northern coast, Shackleton decided to attempt a land crossing of the island, a route no one had previously attempted. For their journey, the men were only equipped with boots they had adapted for climbing by pushing screws into the soles and 50 feet of rope. The condition of the men was dire. They were weak and their bodies were pushed to the extreme limits of human endurance. Nonetheless, Shackleton decided that he, along with 2 others, would cross the uncharted interior of the island. The overland trek was a desperate gamble. They faced steep glaciers, deep crevasses, and unpredictable weather, navigating by compass and intuition. After an arduous 36-hour continuous march, risking falls and avalanches, the trio arrived, exhausted but alive, at the Stromness whaling station. It was unimaginable that 3 strangers would suddenly materialize at the whaling station, especially coming from over the mountains. Yet, there they stood, their hair and beards tangled and unkempt, their faces smeared with the soot of blubber stoves, and lined from the hardships of nearly 2 years. An elderly Norwegian whaler, startled, asked who they were. Ernest replied, "My name is Shackleton." The moment they stumbled into the station marked the end of their extraordinary sea and land journey. Shackleton's first thoughts were of his men left on Elephant Island. He immediately sought help from the station manager and organized a rescue mission. Shackleton's commitment to his crew was unwavering. He attempted several rescue missions to retrieve his men from Elephant Island. The first 3 attempts were thwarted by sea ice, which made it impossible to reach the island. Each failure was a severe blow, but Shackleton persisted. After 3 unsuccessful rescue attempts, fraught with the harrowing challenges of navigating through dense pack ice that blocked their path to Elephant Island, the determination of Sir Ernest Shackleton remained unbroken. His resolve was fueled by the unyielding responsibility he felt towards the men who depended on him. In August 1916, Shackleton made a final attempt to reach his stranded crew. This time, he secured the assistance of the Chilean government, which provided the steamer Yelcho, a small but sturdy vessel better suited to navigate through the treacherous ice. The journey aboard the Yelcho was tense, with each mile fraught with the possibility of failure. As they approached Elephant Island, the sea of ice threatened to dash their hopes once more. However, luck was on their side. A sudden shift in the weather conditions created a narrow channel in the ice, allowing the Yelcho to push through. As the Yelcho neared Elephant Island, the sight that greeted Shackleton was one of profound relief, but tinged with apprehension. The men, though alive, were mere shadows of their former selves, having endured months of extreme cold, dwindling food supplies, and the constant psychological strain of isolation. When Shackleton's figure was recognized, a cheer erupted from the weary men. Emotions ran high as the crew realized their ordeal was finally coming to an end. With all men safely aboard the Yelcho, Shackleton wasted no time in departing the treacherous waters surrounding Elephant Island. The journey back to civilization was a surreal experience for everyone. The men, who had faced death in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, now found themselves bound for home, their survival a testament to human resilience and leadership. Against all odds, all 27 crew members survived the ill-fated trans-Antarctic expedition. Upon their return, the world greeted them as heroes. The story of their survival in the face of overwhelming odds captured the imagination of the public and the press. However, for Shackleton and his crew, the expedition was a personal journey of endurance, sacrifice, and sheer willpower. The rescue marked the end of a harrowing 2-year saga. In the years that followed, the members of the expedition returned to their lives, forever changed by their experience. The legacy of Sir Ernest Shackleton and the Endurance Expedition transcends the immediate narrative of survival and adventure. It has become a timeless emblem of crisis leadership, resilience, and human grit. The story, frequently revisited in leadership seminars and motivational speeches, emphasizes the power of a strong leader to foster unity, instill courage, and command loyalty in the face of overwhelming adversity. Shackleton's leadership style is particularly noted for its focus on morale and his empathetic relationship with his crew. He maintained each man's spirit by involving himself in daily activities, ensuring all crew members felt valued and understood. His decision-making process, which involved careful risk assessment and decisive action, alongside his ability to maintain hope and perseverance, are studied as exemplary practices for managing crises. Shackleton's expedition remains a beacon of inspiration and a source of valuable lessons across centuries, reminding us of the incredible capabilities of humans when united under visionary leadership. The story of the Endurance is not just a tale of survival, it is a guidepost for leading with honor, resilience, and humanity in the face of the greatest challenges. Ernest Shackleton never reached the South Pole or completed a crossing of Antarctica. He embarked on another Antarctic expedition, but the returning veterans from the Endurance noticed that he seemed frailer, less assertive, and lacking the vigor that had once sustained them. On January 5, 1922, while his ship was docked at South Georgia, Shackleton suffered a heart attack in his bunk and passed away. He was only 47 years old. While Shackleton's crew miraculously made it back to England, his ship did not. For more than a century, the Endurance remained among history's most elusive shipwrecks. But in 2022, an international team of marine archaeologists, explorers, and scientists located the Endurance at the bottom of the Weddell Sea, approximately 4 miles south of the position originally recorded when Endurance sank. Photos released from the Endurance 22 expedition revealed the sunken, 3-masted ship in mesmerizing detail, including an image of its stern, where its name, Endurance, was visible above a 5-pointed star. For Maurice and Marilyn Bailey, their ocean adventure would be treacherous. On a rainy day in November 1966 in Derby, England, Maurice Bailey sat across the room from his wife, Marilyn, wondering why she was staring out the window. They had been married for 3 years, long enough for him to recognize the quiet tension that meant something was on her mind. She knew she was the type who needed something beyond the simple life they shared. A small house, a modest job, a routine that kept them safe but caged. It was a dinner later. When she finally spoke, her words spilled out like a confession, long rehearsed. She spoke of escape, of leaving the monotony of England behind, of buying a small yacht and living on the sea. She talked of wind and salt and the quiet rhythm of the tides, of freedom and a life without boundaries. Maurice listened, torn between disbelief and wonder. It was madness, he thought. They didn't know how to sail. They barely had savings. The sea was for other people. Richer, bolder, foolish people. They debated the logistics, the financials, and it seemed virtually impossible. But when they debated the pros of the endeavor, freedom and nature, there was something dangerous about the simplicity of those two words. They carried a weight he could not ignore. In the days that followed, the idea refused to die. It lingered in their conversations, in her hopeful glances, in the soft way she touched his arm when they passed each other in the house. Soon they were both imagining it, their own small world at sea, a place where the wind decided everything and the rest of life fell away. By May of 1967, they had enrolled in sailing lessons at a small lake outside of town. Over the following months, the Baileys practiced relentlessly. Maurice, once doubtful, began to feel the strange pull of the water himself. He learned to read the wind, to feel its pressure through the ropes. Marilyn, radiant and fearless, seemed born for it. Together, they began to move in sync, their small boat gliding smoothly each day. By the spring of 1968, they had passed every exam. Their instructor signed the final papers with a reluctant smile, believing their goal was a foolish endeavor for novices. Nevertheless, he passed them, and they were sailors now in the smallest sense. But sailors nonetheless. They sold their house, left their jobs, and moved to the coast near Plymouth. Maurice took on odd jobs to make up for what they lacked in savings, every penny set aside for the dream they once thought absurd. Slowly, the pieces came together. They commissioned a small yacht, 31 feet, full standing height, built for comfort and stability. It wasn't luxury, but it was theirs. They named the Orlin, a merging of their own names. The boat was beautiful, but it also meant the dream had become real. There would be no turning back now. Soon they would leave the safety of land behind, casting themselves into the open sea with nothing but each other to rely on. But beyond the horizon, the ocean was waiting, silent, endless, and merciless. What awaited the Baileys out there was not adventure, but a waking nightmare that would test the very limits of their will to survive. The wind was sharp with salt and promised the day the Orlin left Southampton. Morris Bailey stood beside his wife Marilyn, the yacht's white sails billowing as they glided from the harbor. Behind them, her mother raised a camera, catching one last image, her daughter smiling bravely through tears. It was late July 1972. 2 years had passed since the Baileys earned their sailing licenses and bought the yacht they named Orlin. Twice they'd delayed the voyage, first for her father's death, then for her own illness. But each delay only hardened Marilyn's resolve to live the dream, to cross the world's oceans together. The Atlantic treated them kindly. For 4 weeks the sun blazed, the wind was steady, and the yacht carried them south through calm waters. Maurice stood proud at the helm, his hands steady on the wheel. He had never felt so sure of himself, so certain that the sea, vast and unknowable, would reward his courage. When a storm finally came, he welcomed it, a test of strength and seamanship. It arrived with a roar. Waves like black mountains crashed over the deck, tossing the Orlin like a toy in a giant's hand. Rain lashed sideways, wind screamed through the rigging, and the deck pitched beneath them. Marilyn clung to the mast, her yellow hood snapping wildly in the gale. Water pummeled her face until she could barely breathe. Maurice fought the wheel, shouting orders that the wind tore away. They were tethered to the deck by safety lines, lashed to the storm itself. When dawn came, the storm was gone, and so were the Baileys' doubts. They had survived. Months later, they reached Panama. The Orlin, gleaming with fresh paint, rocked gently in the port of Balboa. Maurice checked their maps and provisions, while Marilyn wrote a postcard to her mother, her last. Ahead lay the Pacific, the final leg of their voyage. That night, they met their friends Sheila and Neville on another yacht, drinking rum under the tropical stars. The air was soft and sweet, but Marilyn couldn't shake a gnawing unease. Ever since they'd entered the Caribbean, a quiet dread had haunted her. She had begged Maurice to delay their Pacific crossing, but he refused. The sea had become his purpose, and she couldn't take it from him. On February 28, 1973, they sailed from Balboa, their next destination, the Galapagos Islands, 400 miles west. For days, the Pacific shimmered like molten glass. They saw no other vessels, only the endless horizon. Then one night, Morris noticed a light sweeping across the water. A searchlight. Somewhere in the darkness, a trawler moved slowly, and a smaller motorboat circled it like a shark. The light caught their sails for a heartbeat before moving on. Maurice tightened his grip on the wheel. Something about it felt wrong, and he was correct. By the morning, things were going to take a dark turn. By morning, the sea was calm again. Marilyn brewed coffee below deck. The Orlin hummed gently. Then came the impact. The yacht jolted violently. She screamed as the floor heaved and threw her backward. Hot coffee splattered across the cabin. Books, tools, and clothes flew through the air. Maurice hit the wall hard. A sound rose through the hull, a deep, moaning vibration that chilled the blood. When Marilyn reached the deck, she froze. A massive gray form rolled in the water beside them. A sperm whale, bleeding, thrashing, its slick body streaked red. The whale's groan rumbled through the boat's frame. Maurice joined her, speechless. The creature was dying, but in its agony, it had rammed the Orlin, tearing open her belly. Below deck, water gushed in fast. Marilyn waded through the rising flood, tossing supplies into waterproof bags, food, tools, first aid, her journal. The floorboards vanished beneath swirling seawater. Maurice found the wound, an 18-inch gash just below the waterline. He tried to wrap a sail around the hull, but the twin bilge keels made a perfect seal impossible. The ocean was winning. They worked until exhaustion broke them. The yacht groaned, tilted, and began to sink by the bow. Maurice shouted, "Abandon ship!" and began inflating the emergency life raft and small rubber dinghy. Marilyn dragged the sea bags topside, trembling. The Orlin, their home for months, was dying before their eyes. As the deck slipped beneath the waves, they climbed into the dinghy, two souls adrift in a world of water. The yacht vanished without a sound. The sea closed over it like a grave. And just like that, their dream snapped and fell apart, the great voyage collapsing into chaos. The Orlin was gone, the horizon empty, and the Baileys now sat in two scraps of rubber on an ocean that did not know they existed. They were no longer sailors on an adventure. They were prey, alone, exposed, and utterly at the mercy of the Pacific, which was only beginning to show them how cruel it could be. As the Baileys drifted west, clinging to survival, they took stock of the supplies they were able to salvage. 32 cans of food, 10 gallons of water, a few tools, 6 flares. Enough, Maurice said, for 2 weeks, maybe 3. Rescue would come. It had to. Days blurred. The sun blistered their skin. The ocean stretched infinitely and cruelly. At night, they rode under the stars, trying to steer toward the Galapagos, but the current dragged them farther west. Each morning, the horizon looked the same. No land, no ships, only the burning blue void. On day 9, a ship appeared, white against the sky. Marilyn screamed for joy. They fired 2 flares. The first failed, the second soared high, burning red. But the vessel sailed on. The third flare vanished into smoke. The sea was silent again. By the second week, their food was nearly gone. Their lips cracked, their skin peeled, their water dwindled to a few inches in the last jug. On the 18th day, Marilyn hauled a sea turtle aboard. Its flippers flailed helplessly. Maurice hesitated, but hunger conquered mercy. One swing of the paddle, one sickening thud. They carved the meat into small pieces and ate in silence, the taste metallic and warm. When the rains finally came, they danced beneath the storm, mouths open to the sky. For the first time in weeks, they felt alive, but their joy turned to despair when the rainwater tasted bitter. The raft's waterproof coating had poisoned it. They poured it back into the sea. Only a quart was safe to drink. They drifted through endless days of heat and isolation. The sea was their whole world now, its moods, its silence, its indifference. At night they lay side by side, whispering half-dreams of England, green fields, warm beds, the smell of rain on stone. On the 26th night, Marilyn saw movement among the stars, a light sliding across the horizon, a ship. She shook Maurice awake. He scrambled for their last flares. The first fizzled, the second lit the sky in blinding white. The ship did not stop. Their final flare burned, hissed, and died. The darkness swallowed them again. Weeks passed. Rain returned. They learned to collect water cleanly now, using the small lookout hole in the raft's roof. Fish and turtles swarmed around them, drawn to the drifting island of rubber and salt. They ate raw turtle and seabird meat, sipped rainwater, and learned the slow rhythm of survival. By day 40, they had seen 2 more ships. Both passed them by. Maurice fashioned smoke signals from a turtle shell, rags, and fuel, but even the thickest white plumes went unseen. Marilyn cried herself empty that night. Maurice sat silently beside her, too broken for words. By day 55, their raft had sprung new leaks. The lower air tube was punctured, and their patch kit nearly gone. They glued scraps of rubber over the holes, but each peeled away as soon as they touched water. Maurice slumped, defeated. Then Marilyn rummaged through their supplies and pulled out 2 cans of condensed milk. They drank slowly, the sweetness flooding their dry mouths, and smiled through tears. The raft could no longer hold air. They took turns pumping every 15 minutes through day and night to stay afloat. Sleep became a myth. Maurice's arms ached with every stroke of the pump, but he kept going. The hiss of inflating rubber became the rhythm of their survival. And still, against every cruel turn of fate, the Baileys kept fighting. They rowed, patched, and prayed, refusing to yield even as the sea tore at their will. But their strength was draining, their bodies hollowed by hunger and salt. They were nearing their breaking point, and the ocean, ancient and unfeeling, was not done with them yet. By June, they had been adrift for 94 days. For a week, storms battered them without mercy. They bailed water endlessly, hands blistered and raw. Then, in one violent surge, a monstrous wave flipped the dinghy and tore Maurice away. Marilyn screamed his name into the black gale but could see nothing but crashing water. She couldn't swim. All she could do was pray. Then, 50 feet away, a head broke the surface. Maurice, alive, gasping, clawing through the waves. "Grab the rope!" she cried. He fought his way to the raft, blue-lipped and shaking. Marilyn pulled him in, collapsing against him. They held each other and sobbed as thunder rolled overhead. A week later, calm returned. Maurice dried thin strips of fish on a makeshift mast, while Marilyn retied the tether between raft and dinghy. The sea around them teemed with life again. Dolphins, turtles, bright blue herrings. They had become a strange part of the ocean's ecosystem. On the 109th day, the sea shimmered under a cloudless sky. Sharks circled lazily beneath them. Marilyn dangled her hand in the water and laughed. "He lets me touch him," she said. Then, with reckless impulse, she plunged both hands in and lifted a small shark onto the raft. It thrashed, jaws snapping. Maurice shouted, wrapping his head in a towel. Together they held it down until it stilled. By evening, they had meat again, and for a moment, laughter. On the 118th day, June 30th, 1973, the Pacific was glassy and silent. Marilyn sat in the dinghy, pouring seawater over two turtles she called Pet and Thelma. They were her only joy left. Maurice lay nearby, naked, skeletal, barely breathing. Then, faint but clear, came a sound. The low hum of an engine. Marilyn froze. It was real. She grabbed her yellow rain jacket and waved it high. The sound grew louder. On the horizon, a small white ship appeared, heading west. "Over here!" she screamed, her voice cracking. The ship glinted in the sun, a ghost of salvation. Maurice, barely conscious, forced himself upright and waved beside her. The vessel drew closer, then seemed to turn away. Marilyn screamed until her throat bled. The yellow jacket slipped from her fingers into the sea, but the ship turned again. Meanwhile, Captain Sujong stood on the bridge of his ship, the Woolme 306, watching the calm Pacific stretch endlessly around him. After 2.5 years of tuna fishing near the Canary Islands, he and his 20-man crew were finally heading home to Busan. Su thought of pouring himself a cup of coffee until his chief engineer came running up the stairs breathless. "Captain, a man spotted something ahead. He thinks it's an SOS signal." Su frowned. "Out here, in the middle of the Pacific, there shouldn't be anything." He grabbed his binoculars and hurried to the bow. The men were gathered along the railing, pointing toward a flicker on the horizon. Through the lenses, Su saw movement. Something waving. His stomach tightened. "Prepare rescue gear," he barked. "Get first aid ready, full speed ahead." Far below that same horizon, Marilyn was still shouting and waving at the distant ship. Maurice wanted to tell her to stop. He couldn't bear another disappointment. But when she froze and smiled, he turned to look. "It's coming back," she said. He lifted the binoculars. The ship was turning, heading straight for them. His heart leapt. He looked down at himself, thin, filthy, naked. They both laughed weakly and scrambled into the life raft to dress. As Maurice pulled on his tattered shorts and shirt, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. They had survived nearly 4 months adrift in one of the most unforgiving oceans on Earth, and now, rescue. As the ship drew closer, he felt a strange sadness. He would almost miss the ocean's silence, its haunting peace. But when he saw the tears streaming down Marilyn's face, gratitude washed over him. They had beaten impossible odds. Together, the Woolme 306 slowed alongside them, its hull rust-red and towering. Crewmen leaned over the railing, waving and shouting. Maurice and Marilyn must have looked like ghosts, two skeletal figures in half-deflated rafts. A thick rope splashed into the water beside them. Then another Maurice tied it to the dinghy's handle, and soon they were being pulled in. When they reached the ship's side, a sailor dropped a ladder down. Maurice climbed first, trembling but determined, while several men reached to pull him aboard. Then it was Marilyn's turn. Her legs wobbled. She slipped, but a sailor caught her and guided her up until helping hands lifted her onto the solid deck. She blinked in disbelief. Real people. Solid ground. A sailor wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to Maurice, who was kneeling nearby, surrounded by smiling faces. The Baileys were scarcely recognizable as the same couple who had once set sail from Southampton. Both were skeletal and sunburned, their faces drawn tight over bone. Each had lost nearly 18 kilograms, and their legs, stiff and useless after months confined to rubber rafts, could barely support their weight. At first, they could move only on hands and knees. Someone handed her a cup of warm milk. The aroma hit her, and she began to cry. Maurice squeezed her hand, his voice trembling. "We made it, Marilyn. We actually made it." Marilyn looked up at him, then at the kind strangers who had saved their lives. The Korean fishing crew tended to them with quiet care before setting course for Honolulu, Hawaii. 118 days since the Orlan sank, and at last, they were going home. Back in Derby, England, it was July 1st, 1973. Susan, Marilyn's mother, lay on the floor of her daughter's childhood bedroom. She hadn't left the house in weeks. The last postcard from Panama City had arrived in February. Since then, silence. She stared at the phone when it rang, dreading the worst. "Mrs. Bailey?" a distant, accented voice asked. "We are calling from Korea, your daughter. She is alive." Susan gripped the table for balance as her knees gave way. Then she wept harder than she ever had before. 2 weeks later, Marilyn stood on the deck of the Woolme 306 as it glided into Honolulu Harbor. After so long at sea, the land looked unreal. The crew had treated them like family, feeding them, tending their sores, and gifting clothes. They walked down the gangway, unsteady but alive, into a storm of flashing cameras, thin, fragile, but proud. They had drifted 1,500 miles across the Pacific. When they finally went home to England, the Baileys were greeted as celebrities, survivors of the impossible. In the months ahead, doctors treated Maurice for thrombosis, infection, and lung damage. Marilyn healed with only scars on her skin. As they recovered, the Baileys wanted to share their story with the world. So in 1974, they released 117 Days Adrift, later published in the US as Staying Alive, a haunting account of their ordeal. Amazingly, the experience did not extinguish their love for the ocean. By 1975, they had commissioned a new yacht, Orlan II, and returned to sailing. The Baileys often spoke of how the ocean, though vast and merciless, was never truly empty. Throughout their ordeal, they said hundreds of animals, turtles, dolphins, fish, and seabirds, approached their small raft and drifted alongside them for days at a time. Maurice described the creatures as their silent companions, saying their presence eased the crushing loneliness of the Pacific. Marilyn felt the same. After so many months surrounded by marine life, she said, they began to feel like sea creatures themselves, part of the ocean, not just lost upon it, but survival had forced them into heartbreaking choices. One of the main things we killed, which didn't please us at all, were turtles, Maurice admitted years later in an interview with documentarian Alvaro Cerezo. They're such gentle, harmless creatures, but we killed them, decapitated them. I didn't like it one bit. The guilt never left them. After their rescue, both vowed never to take another life for food again. We decided we wouldn't kill any more animals or allow any more to be killed, so we became vegetarians. I haven't eaten meat since. Maurice said Marilyn passed away from cancer in 2002 at the age of 61. Maurice lived on quietly in England, spending his later years in solitude. It's a lonely life, but I think I'm happy being lonely, he proclaimed. When Alvaro Cerezo, who runs the survival travel site Docastaway, stopped receiving replies from Maurice after years of correspondence, he feared the worst. After searching, he discovered that his old friend had died in December 2018. His passing went unnoticed by the wider world. Before his death, Cerezo had recorded a lengthy, heartfelt interview with him in 2016, which he later released to do something special for this beautiful couple. He stated, in it, he reflected on their extraordinary resilience. Maurice and Marilyn spent 4 months adrift in a damaged inflatable raft. They became the longest-lasting castaways ever to survive in such a vessel. Through time, their story has been forgotten, but it deserves to be remembered, he said. Cerezo never met Marilyn, but said he wished he had. Maurice was truly special. After Marilyn died, he lived completely alone, cut off from the world. It's hard to believe, but I might have been the only person he stayed in touch with until the end, Cerezo recalled. Even in death, Maurice Bailey remained what he had become during those 118 days at sea, quiet, humble, and indelibly bound to the ocean that had once tried to claim him. During the interview with Cerezo, Maurice stated, "If I knew someone would come for us, I'd do it again. The sea was our life, the animals our neighbors, but it was Marilyn. She kept us alive. Without her, I wouldn't have made it." At sea, death is always close. It waits in dehydration, hypothermia, exposure, injury, panic, and exhaustion. It does not need to arrive dramatically. Sometimes it comes quietly, after a person stops believing the next hour matters. That is why survival demands something brutal from you. You must keep working when your body is failing. Keep signaling when no one appears to be watching. Keep rationing when there is almost nothing left. Keep protecting yourself from the sun, the cold, and the water. Keep believing in rescue even when belief feels absurd. The sea does not care how afraid you are. The sea is larger and stronger than you are. It does not care how badly you want to live, but as long as you continue making decisions, conserving strength, and refusing to surrender, you can make it through an outdoor disaster. If you've made it this far, please consider clicking those subscribe and like buttons. Want more outdoor disasters content? Check out these videos I believe you'll enjoy. Thank you for watching.